The silence from her son's end was, at first, a balm. For 2 days after she severed the financial cord, Barbara's phone remained blessedly mute. The quiet in her apartment was no longer the suffocating blanket of grief but a clean, empty space in which she could almost hear herself think. She threw out the honey cake, its sweetness a cloying reminder of her naivety. She took the blue dress from her wardrobe door, folded it carefully, and placed it in a box at the back of her closet, burying it like a dead dream. She moved through her days with a strange, numb purpose, cleaning her apartment with a methodical fury, scrubbing away not just dust but the phantom residue of her past life. The silence broke on the third day. It started with a text message from Michael. "Mom, is everything okay? The transfer didn't come through." Barbara looked at the message, her heart giving a painful thud. She saw the calculated innocence in the words, the pretense that this was a simple technical glitch. She did not reply. An hour later, her phone rang. Michael's name flashed on the screen. She stared at it, her thumb hovering over the green answer button. Her hand trembled. The old instinct, the powerful, Pavlovian response to her son's call, fought a fierce battle with her newfound resolve. With a deep, shuddering breath, she silenced the call and set the phone face down on the table. The calls became more frequent. 2 more that afternoon. 3 the next morning. They were punctuated by increasingly frantic texts. "Mom, please answer. The office rent is due." Followed by, "Seriously, what's going on? Jenna is starting to worry." And finally, the first flicker of irritation, "Are you ignoring me?" Each ring, each buzz of the phone, was a test of her new armor. She felt like a recovering addict, white-knuckling her way through withdrawal. The urge to answer, to explain, to soothe, to fall back into her familiar role as the fixer, was immense. But she held firm. Any conversation now, she knew, would be a whirlpool of guilt, manipulation, and emotional blackmail. He had not called to ask how she was. He had not called to apologize for the christening. He had called because the well had run dry, and he was thirsty. The confrontation she was steeling herself for came not from her son, but from a far more formidable, and unexpected, direction. It was a Tuesday evening, a week after the fateful phone call from Jennifer. A soft rain was tapping against her windowpanes. Barbara was sitting in her worn armchair, a book open on her lap, though she had been reading the same page for the last half hour. A sudden, sharp ring of the doorbell startled her. It was too late for a casual visitor. Her heart began to pound a heavy, anxious rhythm against her ribs. She peered through the peephole, and her breath caught in her throat. On her doorstep, illuminated by the dim light of the stairwell, stood Oleg Belmont, Jennifer's father. He had never been to her home. Their interactions over the years had been limited to a few stiff handshakes and polite, meaningless nods at the wedding and a handful of other family events where their paths had briefly crossed. He was a creature of boardrooms and exclusive restaurants, of a world so far removed from her own that his presence on her humble doorstep felt like a tear in the fabric of reality. He looked out of place, a sleek, predatory panther confined in a canary's cage. He was tall and impeccably dressed in a dark, expensive-looking cashmere overcoat that repelled the rain in tiny, perfect beads. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, and his face, with its strong jaw and cold, assessing eyes, was a mask of controlled power. Taking a deep breath, Barbara opened the door. "Oleg Belmont," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. She did not use his patronymic. In her mind, she was meeting him on neutral ground, as an equal, not as the poor relation of his daughter's husband. "Barbara," he replied, his voice a low, resonant rumble. He nodded stiffly, his eyes sweeping over her simple apartment entrance, taking in the worn doormat and the peeling paint on the doorframe. The look was fleeting, but it was filled with the same barely concealed judgment she had seen in his daughter's eyes. "May I come in? We need to discuss a matter of some urgency." She stepped aside, holding the door open. He entered, bringing with him the scent of expensive cologne and damp wool. He moved with an innate, unshakable confidence, as if he owned every space he occupied. He removed his leather gloves with a slow, deliberate motion, his eyes doing a quick, dismissive inventory of her modest living room, the old but comfortable furniture, the framed photos of Michael as a boy, the hand-knitted afghan draped over the sofa. "Can I offer you some tea? Or coffee?" she asked, falling back on the ingrained habits of hospitality, a small act of normalcy in a profoundly abnormal situation. "No, thank you," he said, his tone making it clear that he would not be partaking in any of her humble offerings. "This won't take long." He remained standing, his posture rigid, clasping his hands behind his back. It was a stance she recognized, the stance of a man about to deliver a lecture, to lay down the law. "What can I do for you?" Barbara asked, moving to stand opposite him, refusing to be seated while he loomed over her. She would meet this head-on. He got straight to the point, dispensing with any pretense of social grace. "I understand," he began, his voice flat and businesslike, "that you have decided to withdraw your financial support from Michael and Jennifer's household." The phrasing was masterful in its passive-aggressive condescension. Withdraw financial support. It made her sound like a rogue state cutting off foreign aid, not a mother expecting two healthy, employed adults in their 30s to pay their own bills. "I have decided to focus on my own financial security," she corrected him, her voice quiet but firm. "Michael and Jennifer are grown-ups. They have jobs. They are perfectly capable of managing their own finances." A muscle twitched in Oleg's jaw. "Be that as it may," he continued, "your abrupt decision has created a significant hardship for them. The timing is particularly unfortunate. With the holidays approaching, there are various social obligations to fulfill, appearances to maintain." Barbara waited, her silence a question. She sensed he was circling, working his way toward the real point of his visit. "Jennifer is quite distressed," he went on, a flicker of what might have been paternal concern, or perhaps just annoyance, crossing his face. "She tells me that you have not only stopped contributing to their mortgage and living expenses, but that you've also made it clear there will be no further assistance. This has put them in a very precarious position." "A position of their own making," Barbara said, unable to stop herself. Oleg waved a dismissive hand, as if swatting away an annoying fly. "The details of their budgeting are not my concern at this moment. My concern is the stability of my daughter's home and, by extension, the reputation of my family." He paused, his cold eyes locking onto hers. "We have a very important event coming up. My wife and I are celebrating our 40th wedding anniversary. We are hosting a large gala. The governor will be there. The last thing I need is for my daughter and son-in-law to be facing eviction or having their car repossessed. The gossip would be unseemly." And there it was. The raw, unvarnished truth. His visit wasn't about Jennifer's distress or Michael's struggles. It was about damage control. It was about preventing a public relations disaster that might tarnish the polished veneer of the Belmont family name. Her son's financial ruin was not a personal tragedy to be addressed with compassion, it was a social inconvenience to be managed. "I fail to see how that is my problem to solve," Barbara said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, but each word was laced with ice. Oleg seemed momentarily taken aback, clearly unaccustomed to such direct defiance from someone he considered so far beneath him. He recalibrated, his approach shifting from implied authority to direct transaction. He reached into the inner pocket of his cashmere coat and produced a long, elegant leather wallet. From it, he extracted a checkbook and a gold-plated pen. "Let me propose a business arrangement," he said, his voice now smooth and persuasive, the voice he likely used to close deals. "A temporary solution to our mutual problem." He uncapped the pen with a soft, expensive click. "You resume the payments. Just for a few months. Through the new year. This will give them breathing room. It will allow them to maintain appearances through the holiday season and past my anniversary gala. It will prevent any unpleasant public spectacles." Barbara stared at him, then at the checkbook in his hand, momentarily speechless. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of the proposition left her reeling. This man, this titan of industry, was standing in her humble living room, offering to pay her to continue bankrolling her own son's irresponsible lifestyle. He wasn't offering to help his daughter directly. He was offering to bribe her, to hire her as a financial surrogate to maintain his family's facade. "Let me be clear," she said, her voice trembling slightly with a mixture of disbelief and outrage. "You want to pay me to resume paying my son's mortgage?" Oleg smiled, a thin, humorless stretching of his lips. "Think of it as a consultancy fee," he said smoothly. "A fee for your discretion and cooperation. I will write you a check, right now, for a sum that will more than cover their expenses for the next 6 months, with a generous amount left over for your trouble." The insult was dizzying. Her years of sacrifice, her sleepless nights, her aching tooth, her cancelled vacation, all reduced to trouble that could be compensated with a check. He was treating her conscience as a commodity, her maternal love as a service for hire. A lifetime of ingrained deference, of knowing her place, warred with the raw, primal fury that was surging through her. And for the first time, fury won. "Mr. Belmont," she said, and her voice was no longer quiet. It was clear and strong, and it rang with an authority he had not expected. "My love for my son is not a business. My self-respect is not for sale. If you are so deeply concerned about your daughter's financial situation and your family's reputation, I suggest you write her a check. Help them directly. Teach them about budgeting. Or, better yet, let them face the consequences of their own choices. It's called growing up." Oleg's face, which had been a mask of cool control, darkened with anger. The mask had slipped. He was not used to being lectured, especially not by a poor nurse in a tiny apartment. "I see," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "Jennifer was right about you. Your attitude is problematic. This is precisely why we felt your presence at the christening would be awkward. You harbor resentment." "I harbor a belief that adults should be responsible for themselves," Barbara shot back, her blood singing with the exhilarating, terrifying thrill of speaking her unvarnished truth to power. "I don't resent your daughter's lifestyle. I will simply no longer subsidize it at the expense of my own health and my own future." With a sharp, angry motion, Oleg snapped his checkbook shut and slid it back into his coat. The negotiation was over. He had tried to solve a problem the only way he knew how, by buying a solution. And he had failed. "Very well," he said, his voice clipped. "I can see this conversation is unproductive. I will inform Michael and Jennifer that they will need to make other arrangements." "That would be best," Barbara agreed, her heart still hammering in her chest. He moved toward the door, then paused, turning back with a final, calculating expression. "You know, Barbara," he said, his tone dripping with condescension, "many mothers would be grateful to have their child marry into a family of our standing. The connections, the opportunities, they are invaluable." She met his gaze without flinching. "And many parents, Mr. Belmont," she replied, "would expect their child's in-laws to treat them with basic human decency and respect, regardless of their standing." His lips thinned into a hard, white line. He offered no response. He put on his gloves, opened the door, and walked out into the rainy night without another word. Barbara closed the door and leaned against it, her body trembling with the aftermath of the confrontation. The air in the room still seemed to crackle with his arrogant energy. The sheer, unadulterated gall of the man was staggering. He had come to her not as a concerned grandfather, but as a corporate fixer, attempting to handle a messy family problem as if it were a hostile takeover. He had tried to buy her conscience. And she had refused to sell. The realization settled over her, quiet and profound. The terror she had felt about her future, the void left by cutting ties with Michael, was still there. But it was now joined by something new, something powerful. It was the fierce, unshakable pride of a woman who had been tested by a king and had not bowed. She had stood her ground in the face of immense wealth and power, armed with nothing but her own integrity. And in that quiet, rainy evening, in her small, humble apartment, Barbara Petrova had discovered she was richer than Oleg Belmont could ever imagine. The confession hung in the air of Barbara's kitchen, as thick and tangible as the scent of the rain-soaked wool of Jennifer's coat. The story, in all its sordid, tragic detail, had reconfigured the emotional architecture of the room. The space that had been the site of Barbara's solitary humiliation and later, her quiet resurgence, now became a sanctuary, a crisis center. The woman sitting across from her was no longer the haughty, dismissive daughter-in-law, the agent of her pain. She was a refugee, shipwrecked by the same storm that had nearly drowned Barbara herself. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the only sounds the rhythmic ticking of the old wall clock and the relentless drumming of the rain against the glass. Barbara's mind raced, trying to absorb the sheer scale of the deception. Michael's gambling addiction was a dark, corrosive acid that had eaten away the foundations of their lives, leaving behind a hollowed-out shell of lies. Her financial support, which she had viewed as a nurturing stream, had in fact been gasoline poured on a raging fire. The realization was sickening, a profound violation of her maternal intent. Yet, alongside the nausea, a strange and unexpected emotion began to surface: clarity. The fog of personal hurt, of feeling slighted and unvalued, had been burned away by the harsh, clarifying light of this new, terrible truth. Her decision to cut Michael off, an act born of self-respect and wounded pride, was retroactively revealed to be the sanest, most necessary thing she could have done. It had, she now understood, inadvertently removed the addict's primary enabler. It had precipitated this crisis, forcing the ugly reality out from the shadows. She looked at Jennifer, who was staring blankly at the wall, her face a mask of exhausted despair. The instinct to mother, so long directed at her son, now stirred in her, redirected toward this broken young woman. "What are you going to do?" Barbara asked, her voice gentle, practical. It was the nurse's voice, the voice that cuts through panic to focus on the next step. Jennifer shook her head, a gesture of profound helplessness. "I don't know. I can't go to my parents. Not like this. My father, gambling is the one unforgivable sin in his eyes. His own father lost their family business to it. He would. I think he would disown me for marrying someone with the same sickness, as he calls it. He would see it as a flaw in my judgment, a stain on our family." She shuddered. "I can't face that. Not yet." "You can't go back to Michael," Barbara stated, not as a question, but as a fact. "No," Jennifer whispered. "I'm afraid of him. Not that he would physically hurt me, but, the person he is right now, the rage, it's frightening." They were two women, from vastly different worlds, united by their shared fear of the man they both loved, or had loved. The irony was not lost on Barbara. "You can stay here," Barbara said, the words coming out before she had fully processed the decision herself. Jennifer's head snapped up, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Here? But, after everything? After how I treated you?" "This isn't about how you treated me," Barbara said, a surprising firmness in her voice. "This is about what's happening now. You are the mother of my grandson. You are in trouble. And you have nowhere else to go. The guest room is small, and the bed is probably not as comfortable as what you're used to. But it's safe. You can stay as long as you need to figure things out." Tears, different from the earlier hysterical sobs, began to well in Jennifer's eyes. These were tears of raw, overwhelming gratitude. She nodded, unable to speak, and reached across the table to squeeze Barbara's hand. In that simple, human touch, a fragile truce was declared, an alliance formed in the heart of the storm. The next few days passed in a strange, surreal domesticity. Their small apartment, usually a haven of solitude for Barbara, now housed a quiet, tentative partnership. Jennifer was like a ghost, moving silently through the rooms, her face pale and drawn. She spent hours on the phone in the guest room, her voice a low, urgent murmur as she spoke to banks, credit card companies, and a single, trusted friend. Each call seemed to drain more color from her face, revealing the terrifying depth of their financial ruin. Barbara, for her part, fell into the role of caregiver. She made pots of hearty soup, ensuring Jennifer ate. She insisted Jennifer sleep, bringing her cups of chamomile tea at night. She did not pry or offer unsolicited advice. She simply provided a calm, stable presence, a quiet anchor in the churning sea of Jennifer's chaos. In their shared quiet, they began to talk. Not about the immediate crisis, but about other things. Jennifer, stripped of her social armor, revealed a vulnerability and intelligence Barbara had never seen. She spoke of her own dreams, long suppressed, of working in art curation, a passion she had abandoned for the more suitable path of being a wealthy man's wife. Barbara, in turn, spoke of her life as a nurse, of the small dramas and profound moments she had witnessed, stories she had never thought to share with her dismissive daughter-in-law. A new, delicate respect began to grow between them. Jennifer, who had once judged Barbara's life as simple and quaint, now saw the deep well of strength and resilience beneath the surface. Barbara, who had seen Jennifer as a cold, materialistic snob, now saw the frightened young woman trapped by her upbringing and her own poor choices. They were discovering the people they were, beyond the roles of mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. The precarious peace was shattered on Christmas morning. Barbara had decided they would mark the day quietly. She had bought a small tabletop Christmas tree and decorated it with a few simple glass ornaments. She was planning to roast a chicken, a modest but comforting meal. Jennifer had emerged from her room looking slightly more rested, and had even offered to help peel potatoes, a task she performed with a clumsy but determined focus. A fragile sense of normalcy was attempting to take root. The doorbell rang at precisely 11 o'clock. Its chime was not frantic, like Jennifer's knocking had been, but a single, insistent press. Both women froze, their eyes meeting across the kitchen. They both knew who it was. "Don't answer," Jennifer whispered, her face instantly losing all its color. "He knows you're here, Jennifer," Barbara said softly. "We can't hide. I'll handle this." She walked to the door, her heart a heavy, leaden weight in her chest. This was the confrontation she had been avoiding, the one she had been steeling herself for. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and opened the door. Michael stood on the porch. He looked terrible, worse even than Jennifer had on the night she arrived. His normally neat hair was unkempt, his eyes were bloodshot and shadowed with sleeplessness, and he was unshaven. He was wearing the same expensive coat he'd worn in their social media photos, but it looked rumpled and incongruous with the desperation on his face. He radiated an aura of frantic, frayed energy. "Where is she?" he demanded, his voice raspy, bypassing any greeting. "Is Jennifer here?" Barbara did something she wouldn't have thought herself capable of a month ago. She stepped out onto the porch, pulling the door partially closed behind her, physically blocking his entry into her home. It was an act of territorial defense, a clear signal that the rules had changed. "Michael," she said, her voice calm and even, a stark contrast to his agitated state. "This is not the time or the place to have this discussion." "So she is here," he sneered, his lip curling. "I knew it. She ran straight to you. Has she filled your head with lies about me? Has she turned you completely against me?" "No one has turned me against you, Michael," Barbara said, her heart aching at the paranoid, accusatory tone he was using. This was not her son. This was the addiction speaking, a cornered, wounded animal lashing out. "But Jennifer is going through a very difficult time. She needs some space, and I think you need to respect that." He let out a short, bitter laugh that held no humor. "Space? Right. More like she's hiding from the consequences. Did she tell you about her own spending? Did she mention the credit card she maxed out on designer clothes? She was perfectly happy to enjoy the lifestyle when things were going well. It was a classic addict's tactic: deflect, blame, and rewrite history to spread the responsibility. Barbara refused to take the bait. "This isn't about Jennifer's spending, Michael," she said firmly. This is about your gambling. It's about your lies. You need help. Professional help. The mention of the word gambling made his face contort with fury. I don't have a gambling problem, he yelled, his voice rising, drawing a curtain-twitching glance from a neighbor across the street. I'm an investor. I had a bad run of luck. My strategies are sound. I have temporary financial setbacks, that's all. The delusion was so profound, so absolute, that it chilled Barbara to the bone. Is that what you call it, Michael? She asked, her voice dropping, filled with a sorrowful disbelief. Losing thousands of dollars you don't have at online poker? Taking out cash advances on credit cards to feed slot machines? Pawning the watch your father gave you? She didn't know if the last part was true, but it felt true, part of the same sad, destructive pattern. They stood facing each other on the small porch, the festive wreath on her door, a cheerful circle of pine and red berries, an absurdly cheerful backdrop to this raw, painful family tragedy. In Michael's eyes, Barbara could see the desperate, frantic energy of an addict needing a fix, in his case, the fix of money, of a bailout, of someone else making it all go away. But she could also see, flickering deep within, a tiny, terrified spark of the son she had raised, the boy who knew, on some level, that he had gone terribly, terribly wrong. I think you should leave now, she said, her voice softening slightly, but her resolve unwavering. Go home. Cool down. Come back when you are ready to have a real, honest conversation about getting help. I am not leaving without my wife, he insisted, taking a step forward, trying to push past her to get to the door. Instinctively, Barbara stood her ground, planting her feet firmly. She was a small woman, but at that moment, she felt as immovable as a mountain. Yes, you are, she said, her voice ringing with an authority that surprised them both. This is my home. You are not welcome inside in this state. I am asking you to leave. Michael stared at her, his jaw working, his eyes wide with disbelief. He had never been denied entry to his mother's home before. It had always been his sanctuary, his unconditional refuge. If you refuse to leave, Barbara continued, her voice trembling but resolute, I will have no choice but to call the police. The threat hung in the cold Christmas air between them. The idea was monstrous, unthinkable. Calling the police on her own son. On Christmas Day. You wouldn't, he whispered, his aggression deflating, replaced by a wounded, childlike horror. You wouldn't call the cops on me. I don't want to, she said, and the tears she had been holding back finally welled in her eyes. Michael, you have no idea how much I don't want to. But I will. I will do what it takes to keep Jennifer safe, and to protect the sanctity of my home. And I will do what it takes to stop enabling this sickness that is destroying you. The finality in her voice, the terrible, loving conviction, finally broke through his wall of denial. He saw that she meant it. The fight went out of him. His shoulders, which had been squared with aggressive indignation, slumped in defeat. He looked, for a moment, like a lost little boy. Fine, he muttered, turning away. I'll go. But you tell Jennifer, you tell her this isn't over. She can't just walk away from our marriage, from our debts. There are consequences. The words, meant as a threat, sounded more like a desperate plea. He was a drowning man trying to pull everyone else under with him. He trudged down the walkway, his expensive coat looking like a costume on a broken man. Just before he reached the sidewalk, he paused and looked back over his shoulder. Merry Christmas, Mom, he said, his voice so small and lost it was nearly carried away by the wind. I'm sorry it turned out like this. The apology, weak and incomplete as it was, pierced Barbara's heart. I'm sorry too, Michael, she whispered back, though he was probably too far to hear. I love you. I always will. But I cannot and will not support a disease that is killing my son. She watched until he got into his car and drove away, a plume of exhaust smoke fading into the cold air. Then she went back inside, her body trembling with the aftershock of the confrontation. Jennifer was standing at the bottom of the stairs, her face ashen. "I heard," she said, her voice a thread. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry you had to do that." Barbara walked over and took her daughter-in-law's hand. It was ice cold. "It's not your fault," she said firmly. "Michael's addiction is his responsibility. His actions are his own." She looked into Jennifer's frightened eyes. "That's what family does," she said, a new definition of the word forming in her own mind. "They don't just enable. They don't just pay the bills. They stand for what is right, even when it's the hardest thing in the world. And despite everything, Jennifer, you and I, and that little boy, we are still family." In the quiet of the house, with the faint scent of the Christmas tree in the air and the storm of Michael's rage having passed, the two women stood together, a small, unlikely alliance forged in the crucible of lies and loss, ready to face whatever came next. The echo of Michael's car driving away seemed to linger in the cold Christmas air long after the sound itself had faded. The confrontation had left a humming, nervous energy in the house, a stark contrast to the festive scent of pine and the quiet dignity of the tabletop tree. Barbara closed the door and leaned against it, her entire body trembling with a mixture of adrenaline, sorrow, and a strange, fierce pride. She had done it. She had held the line. She had faced down the storm of her son's addiction and had not yielded. Jennifer was still standing at the foot of the stairs, her hands clenched into white-knuckled fists at her sides. Her face was a canvas of conflicting emotions, relief that the immediate threat was gone, shame for the scene that had transpired on her behalf, and a profound, bone-deep sadness for the man her husband had become. "I can't believe he threatened to call you," Jennifer whispered, her voice filled with a hollow awe. "To demand you sell your home for him." "It wasn't him," Barbara said, walking slowly into the living room. "You have to remember that. It was the disease speaking. It's a cunning, selfish disease that twists love into leverage and sees other people as nothing more than resources." She sank into her armchair, feeling the full weight of the encounter settle upon her. Her strength had been a shield, and now that the battle was over, she felt the bone-deep exhaustion beneath it. "And you," Jennifer continued, following her into the room, "you were so strong. When you said you would call the police. I have never seen anyone stand up to him like that. Not even my father." "Your father tried to buy a solution," Barbara said, a flicker of the previous week's indignation returning. "That's not strength, it's arrogance. Real strength, I'm learning, is about setting boundaries, even when it breaks your own heart to do so." The statement hung in the air, a summary of Barbara's painful, accelerated education over the past few weeks. It was a lesson learned in the crucible of loss and betrayal. Their quiet, somber mood was interrupted by the cheerful ring of the telephone. For a heart-stopping moment, they both tensed, thinking it was Michael again. But a glance at the caller ID showed a familiar, welcome name, Richard. Barbara took a moment to compose herself, to smooth the tremor from her voice, before answering. "Richard, hello. Merry Christmas." "Merry Christmas to you, Barbara," his warm, calm voice was an immediate balm. "I was just calling to see how you were, to wish you and your daughter-in-law a peaceful day. I know it must be a difficult time." The simple, empathetic acknowledgement of their situation, without any prying questions, brought tears to Barbara's eyes. It was such a stark contrast to the demanding, self-centered energy she had just faced. "Thank you, Richard. That's very kind. It has been a challenging morning." There was a slight pause on the other end. "Is there anything I can do?" he asked. "I'm on my own today. My son and his family are with his in-laws this year. I was just about to sit down to a rather lonely-looking roast beef. I would be more than happy to pack it up and bring it over, if you'd be open to some company. No pressure at all, of course." The offer was so gentle, so considerate, it disarmed her. The thought of spending the rest of this fraught day in the quiet, supportive presence of this kind man was incredibly appealing. She looked at Jennifer, who was watching her with a lost, uncertain expression. "Richard," Barbara said into the phone, "that is the kindest offer I've had all day. We would love that. But please, let me cook. I have a chicken ready for the oven. You just bring yourself." "I'll do better than that," he chuckled. "I'll bring a ridiculously decadent chocolate Yule log I bought from the city's best bakery, and a bottle of champagne. I have a feeling we might all need it." After she hung up, a small, tentative smile touched Barbara's lips. "That was Dr. Aslanov," she explained to Jennifer. "A friend. He's going to join us for dinner." The prospect of a guest, an outsider to their intense family drama, seemed to shift the energy in the room. It was a promise that the day would not be entirely consumed by Michael's chaos. It would have another chapter. As Barbara busied herself in the kitchen, preparing the chicken, the familiar, methodical tasks helped to ground her. Jennifer, after a moment's hesitation, came to help, taking on the simple task of washing and peeling vegetables. They worked in a comfortable, collaborative silence, the shared chore a small act of creating order out of emotional chaos. Just as they were putting the chicken in the oven, the doorbell rang again. This time, it was a cheerful, bustling sound. It was Galina, her arms laden with containers. "Merry Christmas," she boomed, striding in, bringing a gust of cold air and warm energy. "I know you said not to come, but I couldn't bear the thought of you two being here alone after everything. So, I brought my famous Olivier salad, some pickled mushrooms, and a koulibiaka. We'll have a feast." Galina's loving, indomitable presence filled the apartment. She took one look at their pale faces and enveloped them both in a fierce, motherly hug. She asked no questions, simply started unpacking her offerings and organizing the table, her competence a force of nature. The impromptu Christmas dinner that unfolded in Barbara's small living room was unlike any holiday gathering she had ever experienced. It was a strange, eclectic assembly, a fellowship of wounded souls and steadfast friends. There was Barbara, the quiet matriarch who had found her roar. There was Jennifer, the fallen princess, tentatively finding her footing on common ground. There was Richard, the distinguished doctor, his gentle presence a calm harbor in their stormy sea. And there was Galina, the pragmatic, fiercely loyal friend, the anchor of common sense. Around the small dining table, extended with a card table and covered with Barbara's best lace tablecloth, they shared a meal that was a patchwork of their different worlds. Barbara's perfectly roasted chicken, Galina's hearty, traditional salads, and Richard's sophisticated chocolate Yule log. The champagne he brought was opened not with a loud, celebratory pop, but with a quiet hiss, and they toasted not to a generic, "Merry Christmas," but, at Richard's suggestion, to strength, to new beginnings, and to the kindness of friends. At first, the conversation was stilted. Jennifer was quiet, withdrawn, clearly intimidated by the presence of these strangers and ashamed of the circumstances that had brought her here. But Galina, with her cheerful, down-to-earth chatter, and Richard, with his skill at drawing people out with thoughtful questions, slowly coaxed her out of her shell. He asked her about her interest in art, a detail he had gleaned from Barbara. Jennifer, surprised, began to speak about her art history degree, about her passion for the Impressionists, her voice gaining confidence as she spoke about something other than her immediate crisis. Galina, in turn, told outrageous, funny stories about her own family, making Jennifer laugh for the first time in days, a real, genuine laugh that brought a hint of color back to her cheeks. Barbara watched this unfold with a sense of quiet wonder. This was community. This was what real support looked like. It wasn't about grand gestures or financial bailouts. It was about showing up. It was about sharing food. It was about listening. It was about creating a safe space where a person could simply be, in all their brokenness, and not be judged. After dinner, as they sat with coffee and dessert, the conversation inevitably, gently, turned to the future. "So, what's the first step, Jenna?" Galina asked, her tone practical, not pitying. Jennifer took a deep breath. "I need to talk to my parents," she said. "I've been putting it off, terrified of their reaction. But I can't hide forever. They need to hear the truth from me. And you need their support, Barbara added softly. Emotional, if not financial. Richard, who had been listening quietly, cleared his throat. Jennifer, he said, his voice carrying the calm authority of a doctor delivering a serious but manageable diagnosis. I don't know your father, but I know men like him. Powerful, proud men who despise weakness. When you speak to him, do not present yourself as a victim. Do not apologize for Michael's failures. Present yourself as a woman who has made a courageous decision to leave an untenable and destructive situation. Frame it as an act of strength, of self-preservation. Men like your father, for all their bluster, respect strength. The advice was so astute, so psychologically precise, that it seemed to land on Jennifer with the force of a revelation. She looked at Richard with newfound respect. Thank you, she said, her voice filled with genuine gratitude. I hadn't thought of it that way. I was just preparing to be ashamed. You have nothing to be ashamed of, Galina said fiercely. You were deceived. Now, the next step. You need a lawyer. And you need to understand your financial position. You can't make a plan until you know the full extent of the damage. I know, Jennifer said, her shoulders slumping a little at the daunting thought. The debt, it's joint. I'm legally responsible for half of it, even the gambling debts. I don't know how I'll ever get out from under it. One step at a time, Barbara said, her voice a soothing anchor. First, you talk to your parents. Then, you find a lawyer. We can help you with that. Galina's nephew is a very decent family law attorney. Then, you look at the numbers. It will be hard. It will be overwhelming. But it is just numbers on a page. It is not who you are. Empowered by the unexpected counsel of war that had assembled around her, Jennifer nodded, a new resolve hardening her expression. Can I use your phone to call them? She asked Barbara. I want to do it now, while I still have the courage. Of course, Barbara said, touched that Jennifer had asked for permission in her own home. Use the study. It's private. Jennifer disappeared into the small room Barbara used for her bookkeeping, and a tense silence fell over the remaining trio. They could hear the faint, urgent murmur of her voice, but not the words. Galina poured more coffee. Richard reached over and quietly placed his hand over Barbara's on the table, a simple gesture of solidarity that spoke volumes. 20 minutes later, Jennifer emerged. Her eyes were red-rimmed from crying, but her face was not one of devastation. It was a face of profound, exhausted relief. They're coming tomorrow, she said, her voice trembling slightly. My parents. They want to drive down and talk in person. How did they take it? Barbara asked gently. Better than I could have ever imagined, Jennifer admitted, a look of wonder on her face. My mother just cried and kept saying she was so glad I was safe. And my father, he was quiet for a long time. But then he said he was proud of me. Her voice broke on the last word. He said it took guts to face the truth and walk away. He was angry, of course, furious at Michael. But he wasn't angry at me. He was supportive. She looked at Richard. You were right, she said. I told him I was leaving to save myself, and he respected that. As their guests finally departed late that evening, bundling up against the cold and leaving behind the pleasant wreckage of a shared meal, a sense of profound peace settled over Barbara's apartment. The day, which had begun with the threat of ugly confrontation and desperate crisis, had ended in an unexpected communion of kindness and strength. Jennifer, emotionally drained but visibly lighter, retired to the guest room. Barbara was left alone in her living room, amidst the lingering scent of roast chicken and pine, the twinkling lights of the small tree casting a gentle glow on the empty chairs. She reflected on the extraordinary, dizzying turn her life had taken. 6 weeks ago, she was a lonely, resentful woman, working herself to exhaustion to fund a life she wasn't invited to, her greatest hope for Christmas a grudging invitation from her son. Tonight, she had hosted her own, impromptu celebration. She had given refuge to her daughter-in-law in her moment of greatest need. She had faced down her son's demons with a strength she never knew she possessed. And she had begun a promising new relationship with a man who saw her, valued her, and supported her without condition. The path forward remained uncertain and fraught with difficulty. Michael's addiction was a deep, complex wound that would require a long and arduous healing process, if he ever chose to undertake it. Jennifer faced the painful, public dismantling of her marriage and the crushing weight of financial ruin. And Barbara herself would have to navigate the treacherous waters of supporting them both without losing herself, without falling back into the old, destructive patterns of enabling. But for the first time in years, perhaps ever, she felt equal to the challenge. She had discovered a strength within herself that had been dormant for decades. The courage to set boundaries. The resilience to withstand emotional storms. The capacity to offer compassion without sacrificing her own well-being. She had cancelled their mortgage payments, yes. But in doing so, she had inadvertently made a down payment on something far more valuable for all of them, a future built not on lies and illusions, but on the difficult, painful, and ultimately liberating foundation of truth. The night was a vast, starless ocean, and Barbara was adrift in its deepest, coldest currents. She did not sleep. Sleep was a luxury for those whose worlds were intact, for whom the ground beneath their feet was solid. Her world had been pulverized, leaving only a fine, bitter dust that settled in her lungs and made each breath an effort. She remained at the kitchen table for hours, a motionless silhouette in the encroaching darkness. The phone on its small table in the hallway was a malevolent black idol, the source of the poison that now coursed through her veins. The silence it had left behind was more deafening than any scream. It was a silence filled with the ghosts of unspoken words, of unappreciated sacrifices, of a love that had been weighed, measured, and found wanting. Her mind, a traitorous archivist, began to unspool the long film of her life as Michael's mother. It wasn't a gentle, nostalgic viewing. It was a forensic examination, each memory now tainted, recontextualized by Jennifer's cold, clinical pronouncement. She remembered the car. Her old, sputtering Lada, a relic from another era. For the past 5 years, its engine had coughed and wheezed like an old man with bronchitis. The passenger door had to be slammed just so, or it would swing open on sharp turns. The heater was a fickle thing, offering a feeble puff of lukewarm air only when it felt generous. She recalled a specific winter evening 2 years ago, driving home from a late shift at the clinic in a sleet storm. The car had died in the middle of a deserted road. She had sat there for an hour, shivering, her fingers too numb to properly dial for help, until a kind truck driver stopped. The next day, Michael had called, his voice full of excitement about the new, top-of-the-line SUV they had just purchased. "It's for the business, Mom," he'd explained. "You have to project success. Besides, it's safer for Leo." The irony was a physical pain, a sharp stitch in her side. Her safety was a trifle, their projection of success was paramount. Her pension had paid for the gas in that luxury vehicle. Then came the memory of the tooth. A persistent, throbbing ache in her back molar that had started as a nuisance and blossomed into a constant, agonizing companion. The dentist had been blunt, the tooth was cracked beyond repair and needed to be extracted and replaced with an implant. The cost was astronomical, nearly 3 months of her pension. She had the money saved, tucked away in a separate account for just such a medical emergency. But that very week, Michael had called in a panic. "Mom, we have a cash flow crisis. A major client is late with a payment, and we have to make payroll. It's just for a few weeks. I'll pay you back the second the money comes in." She had hesitated for only a moment, the throb in her jaw a dull counterpoint to the urgency in his voice. She had transferred the money. The payroll for his team was made. Her tooth was pulled, leaving a gaping hole in her smile that she learned to hide by not smiling too widely. She spent months eating soft foods, mashing her potatoes and vegetables into a bland pulp, while her son and his wife posted photos of elaborate meals at Michelin-starred restaurants, celebrating new deals. The money for her implant was never returned. The cash flow crisis was never mentioned again. Her mind drifted to the vacation she never took. For her 60th birthday, she had planned a small gift for herself, a 10-day trip to a quiet seaside town in the south. She had dreamed of it for years, the scent of pine and salt, the gentle lapping of waves, the simple pleasure of sitting on a balcony with a book and a cup of tea, with nowhere to be and nothing to do. She had booked a small room in a guest house, paid the deposit. A week before she was due to leave, the phone rang. It was Michael. "Mom, I'm so sorry to do this, but we've got an incredible, last-minute opportunity. A tech summit in Berlin. It's a huge deal. All the big VCs will be there. We have to go, but the tickets and hotel are insane. We're just a little short." The story was, as always, compelling and urgent. Her dream of the sea evaporated like morning mist. She called the guest house, forfeited her deposit, and sent the rest of the money to her son. 2 weeks later, she saw the photos. Michael and Jennifer, beaming, not in a conference hall, but posing in front of the Brandenburg Gate, Jennifer holding shopping bags from luxury boutiques. The caption read, "Mixing business with a little well-deserved pleasure. #WorkHardPlayHard #Berlin Adventures." It was this memory, the one of the Berlin Adventures, that finally caused the grief to curdle. The deep, aching sorrow began to heat, to transform. It wasn't just sadness anymore. It was a slow-burning rage. A rage born not of a single insult, but of 1,000 tiny cuts, a long and systematic bleeding of her resources, her dignity, and her love. She wasn't just a benefactor, she was a fool. A willing, blind, adoring fool. They hadn't just taken her money. They had taken her trust and twisted it into a weapon against her. They had taken her sacrifices and rendered them invisible, irrelevant. The narrative she had clung to, that of the supportive matriarch fostering success, was a lie. She was the forgotten, uncredited ghostwriter of their glamorous life. Her frugality was the ink in their pen. Her deprivation was the fuel for their jet-setting. And now that the book was written, the ghost was being exorcised, banished from the victory party so as not to spook the important guests. As the first, pale gray light of dawn began to seep through the kitchen window, something inside Barbara shifted definitively. The tears had dried, leaving her eyes feeling gritty but strangely clear. The storm of emotion had passed, leaving behind a cold, hard, and unshakable resolve. It was not a hot, vengeful anger. It was something far more potent. It was the quiet, absolute certainty of a woman who had finally, after a lifetime of putting others first, chosen herself. She rose from the table, her movements no longer heavy but deliberate. She walked past the honey cake, its sweet scent now an offense, and went straight to her bedroom. She ignored the sad blue dress. Instead, she opened her wardrobe and took out the outfit she wore for meetings with the hospital administration or for parent-teacher conferences when Michael was young. A well-made wool skirt, a crisp white blouse, and a structured blazer. It was her armor. The uniform of a serious woman, a woman who would not be dismissed. She showered, the hot water washing away the grime of the long night. As she dressed, she looked at herself in the mirror. The face that stared back was older than it had been a day ago. The softness around her mouth had hardened into a firm line. The maternal warmth in her eyes had been replaced by a focused, steely glint. She was no longer just Michael's mother. She was Barbara Petrova. And Barbara Petrova was going to the bank. She did not make coffee. She did not eat. She put on her coat, picked up her handbag, and walked out of the apartment, closing the door with a quiet, definitive click. The walk to the bank was a journey through an alien landscape. The city was waking up, delivery trucks rumbled past, people hurried to work, their faces preoccupied with their own ordinary lives. Barbara moved through them like a ghost, an invisible woman on an invisible mission. The air was cold and sharp, and she breathed it in deeply, feeling it scour her lungs clean of the cloying sweetness of her illusions. She felt a strange detachment, as if she were watching herself in a film. The bank was a temple of modern commerce, all marble floors, plate glass, and hushed, efficient quiet. The air was climate-controlled and smelled faintly of money and cleaning solution. It was a world away from her cozy, vanilla-scented kitchen. It was a place of numbers, of transactions, of cold, hard facts. It was exactly where she needed to be. She took her place in the short queue, her posture erect, her handbag clutched firmly in front of her. When her turn came, she stepped up to the counter. A young woman with brightly colored nails and a bored expression looked up. "How can I help you?" "I would like to cancel a regular monthly transfer," Barbara said. Her voice was steady, clear, and devoid of any emotion. The teller typed something into her computer, her nails clicking on the keyboard. "Name on the account?" "Barbara Petrova." More typing. The young woman frowned slightly at the screen. "Okay, I see it. A transfer to Michael Petrov. Are you sure you wish to cancel this, Mrs. Petrova? It's a long-standing automatic transfer. It's been active for 18 months. The teller's procedural question was an unwitting confirmation of the duration of her folly. 18 months. A year and a half of her life, her savings, her self-denial, all reduced to a line item on a bank statement. "Yes," Barbara said, the word a blade. "I am absolutely sure." The teller shrugged, her boredom returning. "As you wish." She pushed a form and a pen across the counter. "I'll just need your signature here to confirm the cancellation." Barbara picked up the pen. It felt cool and solid in her hand. She looked down at the paper, at the box marked signature. This was it. The physical act that would make her decision irrevocable. Her hand did not shake. She signed her name, Barbara Petrova, the script firm and unwavering. It was more than a signature. It was a declaration of independence. It was the final, definitive edit of the story of her life. She pushed the form back. The teller took it, typed a few more commands, and then the deed was done. A few clicks, a piece of paper filed away. A life-altering revolution for one woman was just another mundane transaction for the world. "It's done," the teller said, not looking up. "It will be cancelled effective immediately. Next, please." Barbara turned and walked out of the bank. She stepped back into the morning sunlight, which seemed brighter, almost harsher, than before. She did not feel the triumphant elation of victory. She did not feel the giddy relief of freedom. Instead, as the prompt from her own heart had predicted, she felt a strange, profound heaviness settle upon her shoulders. It was the weight of a purpose suddenly lost. For over 30 years, her primary function, the very core of her identity, had been to be Michael's mother, his provider, his safety net. She had just fired herself from the only job she had ever truly known. The thread that had connected them, a thread she now saw was woven not just of love but of financial obligation and deceit, had been severed. She had cut the umbilical cord with her own hands. It was a necessary, life-saving surgery, for both of them. But it left a wound. And it left a void. She did not go home. She couldn't face the smell of that honey cake, the sight of that blue dress. Instead, she walked to a small, nearby park and sat on a cold, empty bench. She watched mothers pushing strollers, children chasing pigeons, the simple, beautiful pageant of ordinary life. For the first time, she was not watching them through the lens of a mother or a grandmother. She was just a woman on a bench. Barbara. And who was Barbara? She had no idea. The emptiness that surrounded her was terrifying. But as she sat there, feeling the cold seep into her bones, she also felt something else, a tiny, fragile seed of a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. It was the quiet, unnerving, and utterly exhilarating prospect of finding out. The confrontation with Oleg Belmont was a strange and terrifying catalyst. It had drained her, leaving her trembling with an adrenalized exhaustion. But in the aftermath, as the echo of his arrogance faded from her small apartment, something fundamental had been solidified within her. The act of refusing his transactional solution to a human problem had been more than a rejection of his money, it had been a reclamation of her own soul. She had stared into the face of a world that measured worth in currency and social standing and had, for the first time, declared herself solvent on her own terms. Yet, pride did not pay the bills. The void left by the cessation of her maternal duties was vast, and the silence in her apartment was a constant companion. For days, she moved in a listless fog. The simple routines that had once structured her life, waking up, going to work, coming home, felt hollow. She was a nurse with no one to care for, a mother with no one to mother. Her purpose, which had been as clear and singular as a North Star for over 30 years, had vanished. She was untethered, floating in a disorienting new reality. It was her old friend, Galina, who threw her a lifeline, though she didn't know it at the time. Galina, a practical, no-nonsense woman who had seen Barbara through widowhood and countless other life storms, showed up one afternoon with a container of borscht and a worried frown. "You look like a ghost, Barbara," she said, bustling into the kitchen and immediately putting a kettle on the stove. "You haven't been answering your phone." "I was worried." Barbara, who had been sitting in her armchair staring at the wall, simply shrugged. "There hasn't been much to say." "Nonsense," Galina declared, setting 2 cups on the table. "You've been through a war. You need to talk. Or, if you won't talk, you need to do something. You can't just sit here and wither." Galina's visit was a gentle intrusion, a reminder that a world existed beyond her own internal turmoil. As they sat and drank tea, Barbara found herself, haltingly at first, then with a growing sense of relief, telling her friend everything. Not just about the christening or the cancelled payments, but about the demeaning visit from Oleg Belmont. Galina listened, her expression shifting from sympathy to righteous indignation. When Barbara finished, Galina slammed her cup down on the saucer with a sharp clatter. "The arrogance. To think he could buy you. Barbara, I've always said you are too good, too soft. But what you did, standing up to him like that took the strength of a lion." The praise warmed a small, cold corner of Barbara's heart. "But what now, Galina?" Barbara asked, her voice small. "I feel so useless." Galina looked around the kitchen, her eyes landing on the mixer, the rolling pin, the neat rows of spice jars. "Useless? Barbara, you have magic in your hands. People would kill for a slice of your Napoleon cake. My daughter-in-law still talks about the poppy seed roll you brought to her birthday 2 years ago. Why are you hiding this talent?" "It's just a hobby," Barbara demurred. "It's more than a hobby. It's an art," Galina insisted. "In all the years you were pouring your energy into that ungrateful boy, you were neglecting yourself. Your own gifts. Maybe it's time to invest in yourself for a change. Why don't you try selling your baking?" The idea was so foreign, so audacious, that Barbara almost laughed. Her, a businesswoman. She was a nurse. A mother. A quiet woman who found solace in the precise chemistry of flour, sugar, and butter. The world of commerce, of marketing and profits, was as alien to her as Oleg Belmont's world of galas and governors. But the seed Galina planted had found fertile ground in her newly empty life. After her friend left, the idea began to germinate. What did she have to lose? Her days were a long, empty expanse. Her small pension was enough to live on, but just barely. And more than anything, she needed a purpose, a reason to get out of her armchair and turn the oven back on. With a trepidation that felt like standing on the edge of a high dive, she decided to try. She would start small. An experiment. The next morning, she went to the market and, for the first time in years, bought ingredients without calculating the cost to the last kopeck. She bought real butter instead of margarine, expensive Dutch cocoa powder, a whole vanilla bean instead of extract. She returned to her kitchen, tied on her apron, and for the first time since the devastating phone call, she felt a flicker of her old self return. She baked with a focus and intensity that was almost meditative. She made a batch of her signature gingerbread cookies, shaped like hearts and stars, their spicy aroma a comforting antidote to the lingering bitterness in her soul. She baked a classic cherry almond tart, the crust perfectly flaky, the filling a jewel-toned ruby. And finally, she tackled her masterpiece, a honey cake so delicate and ethereal it seemed to defy gravity. As she worked, something miraculous happened. The repetitive, familiar motions, sifting flour, cracking eggs, rolling dough, began to soothe the ragged edges of her grief. The precision required, the careful attention to detail, forced her mind away from the endless, looping replay of her pain and focused it on the present moment. Her kitchen, once a place of solitary sacrifice, began to feel like a place of creation again. When she was done, her small kitchen table was laden with her creations. They looked beautiful, professional. A small, unfamiliar spark of pride ignited within her. Galina, ever the pragmatist, helped her with the next step. "You need a name," she declared. "Something memorable." They brainstormed over tea. Barbara thought of her light, airy cakes. "What about Vanilla Cloud?" she suggested timidly. "Perfect!" Galina exclaimed. "It's gentle, it's elegant, it's you." Galina's tech-savvy teenage granddaughter helped set up a simple page on a popular social media platform. They took photos of the baked goods, arranging them on Barbara's best plates against a clean, white tablecloth. The lighting from the kitchen window gave them a soft, inviting glow. Galina wrote a short, heartfelt description, handmade baked goods, crafted with love and the finest ingredients by Barbara Petrova. A taste of home, a touch of magic. Welcome to Vanilla Cloud. Barbara looked at the finished page, her heart thumping with a mixture of terror and excitement. It was real. It was out there in the world. She felt utterly exposed. The first order came within an hour. It was from a former colleague at the clinic who had seen Galina's post. "Barbara. I'll take the whole cherry tart. Can I pick it up this evening?" Her hands trembled as she typed a reply. That evening, when her colleague arrived and pressed the money into her hand, Barbara felt a dizzying, unfamiliar sensation. It was the pride of earning something entirely for herself, a value assigned not to her sacrifice for others, but to her own unique talent. Word began to spread through the quiet, interconnected networks of the community. Friends told friends. Neighbors told coworkers. Within a week, she had a steady stream of orders. She had to create a schedule, a price list. She was, to her own astonishment, running a small business from her kitchen. Her days found a new rhythm. Mornings were for baking, the apartment filled once more with warm, life-affirming scents. Afternoons were for packaging her creations in simple cardboard boxes tied with twine and a sprig of dried lavender. Evenings were for deliveries and pickups, brief, pleasant interactions with people who were not asking for anything but were, instead, offering her their appreciation and their hard-earned money. One day, she received a large, formal order. It was from the hospital, for their annual doctor's jubilee. They wanted a multi-layered cake, impressive enough for a formal event. The order was placed by the office of the chief physician, a man she knew by reputation but had rarely interacted with directly, Dr. Richard Aslanov. He was a respected surgeon, a widower for many years, a man known for his quiet competence and his slightly melancholy, intellectual air. Barbara felt a flutter of nerves. This was her biggest, most important order yet. She poured all of her skill and artistry into it, creating a magnificent three-tiered sponge cake with a delicate lemon curd filling and a Swiss meringue buttercream frosting, decorated with candied violets. On the day of the jubilee, a courier was supposed to pick it up. But instead, precisely at the arranged time, her doorbell rang. When she opened it, she was surprised to see Dr. Aslanov himself standing there. He was a tall, lean man in his late 60s, with kind, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles and a gentle, thoughtful face. "Barbara Petrova?" he asked, his voice softer than she had expected. "Yes, Dr. Aslanov. I was expecting a courier." He smiled, a slow, pleasant smile that reached his eyes. "I confess, I was curious. My secretary has been raving about a cake wizard who has recently appeared in our city. I had to meet the artist myself. And the aroma coming from your apartment confirms I am in the right place." Barbara felt herself blush, an unfamiliar warmth spreading across her cheeks. She invited him in. He stepped into her kitchen, his gaze taking in not her humble furnishings, but the cake itself, which sat in state on the table. "My goodness," he said, his voice full of genuine admiration. "That is not a cake. That is a sculpture. It seems a crime to cut into it." "It's made to be eaten," she replied, pleased by his reaction. As she carefully boxed the cake, he didn't hover impatiently. He leaned against the doorframe, his hands in the pockets of his tweed jacket, and began to talk to her. He asked about her baking, about the different types of flour she preferred, about the secret to a perfect meringue. He spoke not with the condescension of an important man indulging a simple woman, but with the genuine curiosity of an intelligent person interested in another's expertise. He, in turn, told her a little about the hospital, about the stresses of his job, about a rare medical journal he was reading. Their conversation was easy, natural, a meeting of two minds from different worlds finding unexpected common ground. When he was ready to leave, holding the large cake box carefully in both hands, he paused at the door. "I have a feeling this cake will be the highlight of the evening," he said. "You have a remarkable talent, Barbara." "Thank you, Doctor." "Please," he said, his kind eyes meeting hers. "Call me Richard." After he left, Barbara stood in her kitchen for a long time, the faint, sophisticated scent of his aftershave mingling with the familiar smell of vanilla. The encounter had left her feeling seen. Oleg Belmont had looked at her and seen a pawn. Her son had looked at her and seen a bank. This man, this respected, intelligent doctor, had looked at her and seen an artist. She began to look forward to his orders. He became her most regular customer. Every week, he would order a small cake or a box of pastries, always citing a different reason, a nurse's birthday, a small office celebration, a treat for the night staff. And he always came to pick it up himself. Their brief weekly conversations became the highlight of her week. They were small islands of intelligent, respectful connection in the ocean of her new, solitary life. He told her about his late wife, an English literature professor, and his love for classical music. She told him about her childhood, about learning to bake at her grandmother's knee. They discovered a shared love for old black and white films and a mutual dislike for modern, noisy blockbusters. One crisp autumn afternoon, as he was paying for a pear and frangipane tart, he hesitated. "Barbara," he began, a touch of nervousness in his usually composed demeanor. "The Philharmonic is performing a program of Mozart next Saturday. I have 2 tickets. I realize this is forward, but I was wondering, if you would consider accompanying me." Barbara's heart gave a jolt so sharp it felt like a physical impact. A date. It was unmistakably an invitation for a date. The thought was so alien, so long banished from the realm of possibility, that she couldn't immediately form a response. She, a grandmother, a quiet baker, being asked out by this distinguished, handsome man. She looked at him, at his hopeful, slightly anxious expression. She thought of the long, empty evenings in her apartment. She thought of the silent phone. She thought of the future, which had seemed just days ago like a vast, gray, featureless plain. And she smiled. A real, genuine smile that reached her eyes and erased the tired lines of grief. "Richard," she said, her voice soft but clear. "I would love that." As he left, a wide, boyish grin on his face, Barbara leaned back against her kitchen counter, her hand pressed to her fluttering heart. The air was thick with the scent of baked pears, almonds, and the sweet, unexpected promise of a new beginning. The vanilla cloud was not just the name of her business. It was the feeling that was beginning to fill the empty spaces in her life, a soft, fragrant, and hopeful mist after a long and devastating storm. Barbara, at 62, was a woman defined by sense. Her hands, netted with the fine lines of age but still strong and deft, always carried the ghost of vanilla, cinnamon, and warm milk. Her modest two-bedroom apartment, inherited from her parents, seemed to have absorbed the aromas of decades of baking, transforming it into a sanctuary of warmth and comfort in the midst of a bustling city. The kitchen was her sanctum, the old oven her faithful ally, and the wooden rolling pin, polished to a soft gleam by 1,000 touches, her magic wand. Here, amidst the gentle dust of flour and the neat rows of spice jars, she felt she belonged. For her entire working life, she had been a nurse at the local clinic. It was a difficult, often thankless job, but it was honest. She had seen pain, suffering, human grief, and the small, quiet joys of recovery. The profession had taught her patience and the art of self-sacrifice. She could administer an injection so skillfully that a child barely whimpered, and she could find words of comfort for the elderly who were consumed by loneliness. But her primary patient, the central project of her entire existence, had always been him, her only son, Michael. Her husband, Paul, a quiet and dependable engineer, had passed away 15 years prior, leaving behind a cavernous void and a stack of his favorite books on the nightstand. With his passing, all of her light, her boundless maternal love, and her unspent care focused like a laser on Michael. He was her golden boy, her hope and her pride. Intelligent, capable, he had graduated from school with top honors and entered a prestigious technical university. Barbara had worked 1.5 shifts, denying herself everything, so that her son could have the best, a good computer, expensive textbooks, the freedom to focus on his studies without worrying about part-time jobs. She believed in him the way one believes in a higher power, blindly, devotedly, and without reservation. And then, Jennifer entered Michael's life. Tall, slender, with impeccably styled hair and a gaze that held a faint condescension for anything that didn't meet her lofty standards. Jennifer hailed from a different universe, a world of exclusive clubs, foreign resorts, and her father's formidable wealth. Her father, Oleg Belmont, was a major construction magnate, a man as hard and influential as the concrete foundations his company poured. At their wedding, a lavish and soulless affair, Barbara, in her best but modest dress, felt like an outsider, a field daisy that had accidentally found its way into a flawless bouquet of orchids. She saw how Jennifer and her mother exchanged quick, appraising glances at her attire, her simple hairstyle, her reserved demeanor. But she pushed the unsettling thoughts away. The only thing that mattered was Michael's happiness. And he seemed happy. A year after the wedding, he called her, his voice ringing with excitement. "Mom, I have incredible news. Jenna and I are starting our own business. An IT startup. It's called Synergia Innovate. We're going to develop a platform to optimize logistics processes. It's a breakthrough, Mom, a real game changer." Barbara understood less than half the words. Optimization, platform, synergy, it was all a foreign language to her. But she clearly heard the most important parts, breakthrough and business. Her boy, her Michael, was becoming a man of substance. Not just an employee, but a creator, an entrepreneur. Her heart pounded with such pride that tears welled in her eyes. "Oh, Michael, my dear, what a joy. I'm so happy for you," she exclaimed with genuine delight. The first alarm bell, faint and distant, rang a month later. "Mom, there's something," Michael began, his tone slightly sheepish. "We need some capital to get off the ground. We've already secured some funds from my father-in-law, but it's not enough. We need to lease a respectable office downtown. We can't exactly meet with investors in a shared workspace. We need good equipment, salaries for the programmers. You see, it all has to look serious. It's an investment in the future. Could you possibly help out?" It's just for a couple of months, until we secure our first round of funding. I'll pay you back every penny, with interest. Without a moment's hesitation, Barbara replied, "Of course, son. How much do you need?" That same day, she went to the bank and withdrew nearly half the funds from her savings account, money she had been setting aside for a rainy day, and for fixing the leaking roof at her small country dacha. As she carried the money to the bank for the transfer, she didn't feel like a victim, but like a co-conspirator in a grand endeavor. She was an investor. The very first investor in her son's brilliant future. The couple of months stretched into 18. The requests became a regular occurrence. Every month, Michael would call with a new story. One month, it was a crucial conference in Europe. "Mom, all our potential clients will be there, we can't miss this opportunity." The next, it was a team-building retreat for the staff at a country resort. "It's for motivation, Mom. You can't succeed without a cohesive team." Then, "Jennifer needed a new wardrobe, she's the face of our company, she meets with partners' wives, she has to look impeccable." Barbara listened and believed. She inhabited the reality he so convincingly painted for her. She would visit his social media page and see the evidence. Here were Michael and Jennifer in an airport business lounge, here they were at dinner in an expensive restaurant with the hashtag business meeting, here was Jennifer showing off a new handbag with the caption #status matters. And Barbara, finishing her meager portion of oatmeal, would smile. Her boy was succeeding. Her own humble life was the price she was more than willing to pay for that success. Her world had shrunk to the bare essentials. She stopped going to the hairdresser, learning to trim her own hair in front of the bathroom mirror. She mended old sweaters, even though arthritis was beginning to make her fingers clumsy. The faucet in the kitchen continued its relentless drip, a monotonous song of poverty lulling her to sleep at night. When her old friend, Galina, who had dropped by for tea, gently remarked, "Barbara, don't you think they're taking on too much? Maybe they should be a bit more modest." Barbara flared up. "Galina, you don't understand. This is big business. The rules are different. You can't walk in to ask investors for millions while wearing a cheap suit. It's just how the game is played. Michael knows what he's doing." Galina sighed and didn't argue further. Barbara saw the pity in her friend's eyes and refused to accept it. Pity was for losers, and she was the mother of a winner. The brightest event during this period was the birth of her grandson, Leo. A tiny, wrinkled bundle of life, whom she had only seen in photos on her phone, instantly became the center of her universe. Now, her sacrifices had a new, higher purpose. She wasn't just working for her son's business, she was working for her grandson's future. So that little Leo could have everything she had never even dreamed of. She imagined walking with him in the park, placing his tiny hands on her rolling pin, and teaching him how to roll out dough. She knitted him a dozen pairs of tiny woolen socks and booties, though Jennifer, seeing them on a video call, had smiled politely and said, "Barbara, that's so sweet, but we only buy him hypoallergenic items from European brands." Barbara wasn't offended. She simply tucked the booties into a drawer. The time would come, she thought, when her grandson would appreciate the warmth of his grandmother's hands. And now, the day that was meant to be the pinnacle of her maternal pride was approaching, the day when all her sacrifices would be rewarded. Leo's christening. She envisioned the event in meticulous detail. A large, sunlit church. Elegantly dressed guests. Her Michael, so mature and distinguished, holding his son. And she, his mother, standing beside them, a modest but integral part of this triumph. She prepared for weeks. From her diminished pension, she managed to save a little money and bought a new dress. It was dark blue, with a simple, classic cut, devoid of any frills. It wasn't expensive, but it was elegant. She even went to a hairdresser for the first time in 2 years. She rehearsed in her mind what she would say when guests congratulated her. She would speak with dignity, with quiet pride, as befit the mother of such an outstanding son and the grandmother of such a wonderful grandson. From her jewelry box, Barbara retrieved an old silver spoon with the letter P engraved on it, the only thing she had left from her father, Paul. This would be her gift to her great-grandson. A gift with meaning, with history. Not a soulless brand-name item, but a piece of their family legacy. She sat in her small living room, the new dress hanging on the wardrobe door, the spoon, wrapped in a small velvet cloth, resting on the table. Dusk gathered outside the window. She felt utterly, completely happy. She had done everything she could. She had given everything she had. And now, with a trembling heart, she awaited her hour of glory, her invitation to the celebration that, she fervently believed, was being held in her honor, too. She did not yet know that there would be no invitation. That her ticket to this festival of life had long been voided by the very people for whom she had sacrificed her own. In her cozy, vanilla-scented world, there was only peace and blissful ignorance. But beyond its walls, a cold and merciless verdict had already been delivered. The week leading up to the christening passed in a haze of blissful anticipation for Barbara. It was a secret, joyful hum beneath the surface of her everyday life. Each morning, she would wake up and her first thought would be of the coming Sunday. The feeling was a physical presence, a warmth that spread from her chest to her fingertips, making the chill of the autumn air seem insignificant. Her small apartment, already a haven of comfort, now felt like the antechamber to a grand celebration. She spent hours in quiet preparation, rituals that were as much for her own heart as they were for the event itself. The dark blue dress, a testament to her careful saving, hung on the outside of her wardrobe door. It was a silent, elegant promise. Each time she passed it, she would run her hand over the smooth, cool fabric, imagining the feel of the starched church pews against it. She tried it on twice more, standing before the full-length mirror, turning this way and that, practicing a smile that was both proud and demure. She was not just a guest, she was the matriarch, the root from which this new, successful branch of the family had grown. The dress had to convey that quiet dignity. The silver spoon became her totem. She polished it every evening until it shone with a soft, lunar brilliance, reflecting her own hopeful face in its tiny, distorted bowl. Holding it, she felt a connection to a lineage of simple, hard-working people. Her father, Paul, had been given this spoon at his own christening. It had survived a war, a cross-country move, decades of use, and still it endured. It was a symbol of resilience, of legacy. It was real, tangible history in a world that, from her son's social media posts, seemed to be made of fleeting digital images and expensive, disposable trends. This spoon, she thought, would be an anchor for her grandson, a reminder of where he came from, a silent counterpoint to the glittering, superficial world of the Belmonts. Her daydreams were vivid and detailed. She saw the church, grand and echoing, shafts of dusty sunlight cutting through the stained glass windows. She could almost smell the specific, sweet scent of incense and old wood. She pictured Michael, looking so handsome and serious in a dark suit, holding little Leo, who would be wrapped in a confection of white lace. She imagined the moment the priest would touch the baby's forehead with holy water, and a collective, reverent hush would fall over the congregation. And she would be there, in the front pew, her heart swelling with a love so immense it felt it could fill the entire vaulted space. In her most cherished version of this daydream, there would be a quiet moment afterwards. Perhaps at the reception, amidst the clinking of champagne glasses and polite murmurs. Michael would pull her aside, away from the crowd. He would take her hand, his own so large and capable now, and look her in the eye. He wouldn't need to say much. Just a look, a squeeze of her hand, and a quiet, "Thanks, Mom. For everything." That was all she wanted. Not a public acknowledgement, not a lavish gift. Just that small, private recognition that her sacrifices had been seen, that her unwavering support had been the foundation upon which he had built his success. On Saturday afternoon, the day before the christening, she baked. It was her way of channeling the overwhelming emotions, of giving her joy a physical form. She made a honey cake, her specialty, light and fragrant, with layers of sour cream frosting. It was not for the party, she knew they would have a professional caterer for that. This was for her own small celebration at home, a personal offering to the universe. As the warm, sweet scent filled her apartment, she felt a sense of profound peace. All was right with the world. The phone rang at precisely 5 o'clock, its sharp, electronic trill cutting through the gentle hum of the refrigerator. She wiped her flour-dusted hands on her apron, her heart giving a little leap. It would be Michael, she thought, calling to confirm the time they should pick her up tomorrow. "Hello," she answered, her voice warm with affection. "Barbara, it's Jennifer." The voice was not warm. It was cool, polished, and utterly devoid of emotion, like a pre-recorded announcement. The formal use of her first name, not the mom that Michael used or the affectionate Aunt Barbara some of his friends had adopted, immediately set a strange, formal tone. "Jenna, dear. Hello. I was just thinking about you all. How are you? And how is my little Leo?" Barbara's voice was a cascade of grandmotherly warmth, a stark contrast to the Arctic chill on the other end of the line. There was a slight pause. "We're fine, thank you. Leo is fine. Listen, I'm calling about tomorrow, about the christening." "Yes. I'm so excited I can hardly sleep. Is there anything I need to bring?" "I've got my gift all wrapped and ready." Another pause, longer this time. Barbara could hear a faint, sterile silence, as if Jennifer were calling from an empty, soundproofed room. "Actually," Jennifer began, her voice meticulously neutral, "that's what I needed to talk to you about. Michael and I, well, we've been discussing it with my parents, and we've come to a collective decision." The use of corporate jargon, collective decision, struck Barbara as odd, clinical. "A decision? About what, dear?" "We think it would be for the best, if you didn't attend tomorrow." The words hung in the air, incomprehensible. Barbara's mind simply refused to process them. It was as if Jennifer had spoken in a foreign language. She felt a strange buzzing in her ears. "What was that, dear?" she asked, her voice a little faint. "The connection must be bad. It sounded like you said." "The connection is fine, Barbara," Jennifer's voice cut in, a fraction sharper now, impatient. "I said, we think it would be best if you skipped the christening." This time, the words landed. They landed like shards of ice in her chest, each one piercing her with a cold, sharp pain. She sank onto the small stool by the phone table, her legs suddenly unable to support her. The receiver felt heavy, a dead weight in her hand. "But, why?" The question was a whisper, a breath of disbelief. "Is something wrong? Did I do something?" "No, no, of course not," Jennifer said, the placating tone somehow more insulting than open hostility. It's a very specific kind of event. My father's business partners will be there, some very influential people from the city council. It's as much a networking event as it is a family gathering, if you understand." Barbara did not understand. She understood only that she was being excluded. Jennifer continued, her words precise and measured, each one chosen to inflict maximum damage while maintaining a veneer of civility. "And, well, your presence, it might create a certain awkwardness. You have a lovely, simple way about you, Barbara, but it doesn't quite align with the circle we'll be in. We wouldn't want to put you in an uncomfortable position, having to make conversation with these people. It's really for your own comfort as well. Simple. Awkward. Uncomfortable position." The words echoed in the sudden, vast emptiness of her mind. She, who had navigated the complex worlds of life and death in a hospital for 40 years, who had calmed hysterical relatives and held the hands of the dying, was being deemed too simple to attend her own grandson's christening. The excuse of it being for her comfort was the most profound insult of all, a denial of her own strength, her own intelligence, her own personhood. A desperate, final hope flickered within her. This was Jennifer's doing. Her snobbery, her cold heart. Michael would never. Does Michael know you're saying this, she stammered. Of course, Jennifer replied instantly, dashing that hope to pieces. As I said, it was a collective decision. Michael agrees completely. He understands the importance of these social dynamics for our future, for the business. That was the final blow. Michael. Her son. Her golden boy. The one for whom she had sacrificed everything. He agreed. He was a willing participant in this brutal act of exclusion. The foundation of her world crumbled into dust. She tried to summon one last argument, the most fundamental truth she knew. But I'm his grandmother, she whispered, the words catching in her throat, thick with unshed tears. And we'll be sure to send you all the professional photographs afterwards, Jennifer said, her voice bright and dismissive, as if offering a delightful consolation prize. You'll be able to see everything. Now, I have to run, we have a final meeting with the caterer. You take care, Barbara. The line clicked. Silence. The silence that followed was not merely an absence of sound. It was a physical entity, a thick, suffocating blanket that fell over her, smothering the warm, vanilla-scented air in her apartment. She sat on the stool for a long time, the receiver still pressed to her ear, listening to the dead, empty hum of the dial tone. Slowly, as if moving underwater, she placed it back in its cradle. Her gaze drifted around the room. Everything looked the same, yet nothing was. The honey cake cooling on the counter suddenly smelled cloying, sickeningly sweet. The dark blue dress hanging on the wardrobe was no longer a symbol of pride, but a monument to her foolishness, a costume for a role she had been cruelly denied. The silver spoon on the table seemed to mock her with its useless, sentimental gleam. It was a relic from a world of genuine connection, a world that clearly had no place in the one her son now inhabited. She stood up and walked, her steps heavy and robotic, to the window. She stared out at the darkening street, at the ordinary lives unfolding in the windows across the way, but saw nothing. The words replayed in her mind, a relentless, torturous loop. Doesn't fit in. Awkwardness. Simple. Uncomfortable position. Michael agrees. This wasn't just about a missed party. This was a verdict on her entire life. Her sacrifices hadn't been seen as a foundation, they had been seen as a liability. Her love wasn't a precious gift, it was an embarrassing, lower-class burden to be hidden away when important people were present. She had thought she was an investor, a silent partner in their success. She was wrong. She was just a resource, a mine to be exploited for its raw materials, and now that the valuable ore was extracted, the empty, simple husk was being discarded. The tears finally came, but they were not hot, passionate tears of anger. They were cold, silent tears of profound disillusionment. They traced slow, icy paths down her cheeks as she stood motionless in the twilight. She wasn't just grieving the loss of a celebration. She was grieving the loss of her son, not his physical presence, but the son she thought she knew, the one she had loved and sacrificed for. That son, she realized with a clarity that was as painful as a physical blow, did not exist. He had been replaced by a stranger who measured his mother's worth and found it wanting. She sat down at her kitchen table as darkness completely enveloped the room. She didn't turn on a light. She sat in the cold, her hands resting on the oilcloth, the lingering scent of vanilla and honey now a mocking ghost of the happiness she had felt only an hour before. The illusion was gone, stripped away with a few carefully chosen, brutal words, leaving behind only the cold, hard, and undeniable truth. The weeks that followed Richard's invitation were a period of quiet, tentative blossoming for Barbara. The world, which had shrunk to the four walls of her apartment and the bitter landscape of her grief, began to expand again, revealing unexpected colors and textures. Her date at the Philharmonic was a revelation. She had forgotten the sublime pleasure of sitting in a darkened hall, allowing the soaring, intricate beauty of Mozart to wash over her, to cleanse the cluttered corners of her mind. She had forgotten what it felt like to be in the company of a man who listened with genuine interest, who laughed at her small jokes, and whose eyes, when they met hers across the candlelit dinner table after the concert, held a warmth and admiration that felt both thrilling and deeply comforting. Her small business, Vanilla Cloud, continued to flourish. It had become more than a source of income, it was her connection to the community, her daily dose of purpose. Each cake she crafted, each cookie she baked, was a small testament to her resilience, an act of creation in the face of destruction. The praise she received from her customers was a balm to the old wounds left by her family's disregard. Here, her talent was not just seen, it was celebrated. Richard became a gentle, steady presence in her life. Their weekly meetings over a pastry box evolved into weekend walks in the park, visits to small art galleries, and long, meandering conversations over coffee. He was a man of quiet depth and profound kindness. He never pried into the details of her rift with her son, but she knew he understood its shadow. He spoke of his own loneliness after his wife's passing, not with self-pity, but with a quiet, accepting sadness that made her feel safe enough to acknowledge her own. With him, she felt not like a discarded mother or a simple woman, but like Barbara, a woman with a past, a present, and, to her own astonishment, a future. It was on a particularly cold and rainy Tuesday night, weeks after her first date with Richard, that the ghost of her old life came knocking at her door. It was late, past 9 o'clock. The rain lashed against the windows, and the wind howled a mournful song. Barbara was in her favorite armchair, a plaid blanket over her knees, a cup of herbal tea steaming on the side table, enjoying the simple pleasure of being warm and dry while the storm raged outside. A sudden, frantic knocking on her door made her jump. It wasn't the polite ring of the doorbell. It was a desperate, urgent pounding. Her first thought, a cold spike of fear, was of Michael. Was he in some kind of trouble? Had he finally come to confront her in a rage? Her heart hammered against her ribs as she approached the door and looked through the peephole. What she saw stunned her into momentary paralysis. It wasn't Michael. It was Jennifer. But it was a Jennifer she had never seen before. The polished, imperturbable mask was gone, shattered. Her expensive, perfectly styled hair was plastered to her head in wet, straggling clumps. Her makeup was a disastrous ruin, with black mascara tracks running down her pale cheeks like rivers of tar. She was wearing a thin trench coat, clearly inadequate for the weather, which was soaked through. She was trembling either from the cold or from some powerful, internal tremor. She looked utterly broken, a pristine marble statue that had been pushed from its pedestal and smashed on the pavement. For a moment, a cold, hard knot of resentment tightened in Barbara's chest. This was the woman who had delivered the cold verdict, the architect of her humiliation. A part of her wanted to keep the door locked, to leave her out in the storm she had helped create. But the nurse in her, the ingrained instinct to respond to suffering, overrode the anger. This was a human being in deep distress. She unlatched the door and opened it. Jennifer stumbled inside, bringing with she a gust of wind and the smell of rain and despair. She looked around the small, warm entryway as if she had never seen it before, her eyes wide and haunted. "Can I come in?" she whispered, her voice a raw, broken croak. "You're already in," Barbara said quietly, closing the door against the storm. "Take off your coat. You'll catch your death." Jennifer fumbled with the buttons of her trench coat, her fingers clumsy and shaking. As she shrugged it off, Barbara saw that the silk blouse underneath was also damp. She was shivering uncontrollably. "Come into the kitchen," Barbara said, her voice gentle despite the turmoil in her own heart. "I'll make you some tea." In the kitchen, under the warm, steady light, Jennifer looked even worse. Her face was bloodless, except for the raw red rims of her eyes. She sank onto a chair at the kitchen table, the same chair where Barbara had sat and absorbed the news of her banishment from the christening, and buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with violent, silent sobs. Barbara moved around her with quiet efficiency, filling the kettle, finding a clean, dry towel. She draped the towel over Jennifer's trembling shoulders and placed a steaming mug of tea in front of her, her movements automatic, professional, the way she would have tended to a patient in shock. She didn't speak, sensing that words would be useless right now. She simply sat down opposite her and waited. It was a long time before Jennifer's sobs subsided into ragged, gasping breaths. She finally lifted her head, her face a mess of tear-streaked makeup and profound misery. She took a shaky sip of tea, her hands trembling so much the cup rattled against the saucer. "I had to come," she said, her voice hoarse. "I didn't know where else to go. Michael, he doesn't know I'm here. He thinks I'm at my mother's." A cold premonition slid down Barbara's spine. "Is everything all right, Jennifer?" Jennifer let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, a sound of pure hysteria. "All right?" "No, Barbara. Nothing is all right. Nothing has been all right for a very long time. It's all a lie. Everything." She took another gulp of tea, as if for courage, and then the words began to pour out of her, a torrent of confession that had clearly been dammed up for months, years, behind a wall of pride and fear. "There is no Synergia Innovate," she said, the name of the company sounding absurd and pathetic in the cozy kitchen. "I mean, there was. For a few months. But it failed. It failed spectacularly, almost a year ago. We lost everything we put into it. My father's initial investment, the money we borrowed, everything." Barbara stared at her, her mind struggling to process the information. "Failed? A year ago? But the calls, the requests for money, the stories of conferences and deals. But Michael told me." She began, her voice trailing off. "Michael lied," Jennifer said, the words stark and brutal. "He lied to you. He lied to my father. He lied to our friends. He even lied to me, for a while. He couldn't accept the failure. His ego, my father's expectations, he just couldn't face it. So he built a fantasy. A giant, glittering, expensive fantasy. And he made us all live in it." The pieces of the puzzle, the oddities and inconsistencies she had subconsciously noted and dismissed, began to slam into place with sickening force. The constant, urgent need for cash flow. The vague, jargon-filled explanations of the business. The lavish spending that seemed to far outstrip the profits of a fledgling startup. "The money," Barbara whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "The money I was sending you every month." Jennifer couldn't meet her eyes. She stared down into her tea mug as if it held the secrets of the universe. "It wasn't for payroll," she confessed, her voice barely audible. "There was no payroll to make. It wasn't for office rent. He'd lost the office months ago. It was for keeping up appearances. It was to pay the lease on the SUV. It was to pay for the dinners at expensive restaurants where he would pretend to be meeting with investors. It was to pay the minimum on the credit cards he was using to fund this performance." She took a shuddering breath. "It was to pay the interest on the secret loans he took out from very unsavory people when your money wasn't enough." The scale of the deception was breathtaking. Barbara felt a wave of nausea. She had not been an investor in her son's dream. She had been the unwitting financier of his elaborate, pathological lie. Her sacrifices hadn't built a business, they had wallpapered over a ruin. "Why didn't you tell me?" Barbara asked, the question devoid of accusation, filled only with a deep, weary pain. "Why didn't you stop him?" Jennifer finally looked up, and in her eyes, Barbara saw a reflection of her own past foolishness, a potent cocktail of fear, denial, and a desperate desire to believe. "I was a coward," she said bluntly. "At first, I believed him too. He kept saying it was a temporary setback, that he had a new plan, that a huge deal was just around the corner. I wanted to believe him. My entire identity was tied up in being the wife of a successful tech entrepreneur. The thought of admitting to my parents, to our friends, that my brilliant husband was a failure, it was unthinkable." She gave a bitter, self-deprecating laugh. "I was so worried about appearances, about what people would think. I was so terrified of my father's disappointment. He worships success and despises failure. He would have seen Michael's failure as my failure. So I played along. I posted the happy pictures on social media. I smiled at the parties. I lied. I became his co-conspirator. In that moment, the sharp-edged resentment Barbara had harbored toward Jennifer softened, replaced by a complex, pitying understanding. Jennifer had not been the cold, calculating villainess of her story. She had been another victim, trapped in the same web of deceit, albeit a gilded one. Her prison was made of social pressure and parental expectation, while Barbara's was made of maternal love, but they were prisons nonetheless. But it got worse, Jennifer continued, her voice dropping lower. The lies became bigger. The debt grew deeper. He became different. Secretive. Angry. He would stay out all night, and I would find withdrawal slips from ATMs near casinos. He wasn't just lying about the business anymore, Barbara. He was gambling. He was trying to win back the money he'd lost. He was chasing his losses, digging the hole deeper and deeper with every bet. Gambling. The word landed in the quiet kitchen with the thud of a coffin lid. It explained the desperation, the irrationality, the constant, insatiable need for money. The money from me, Barbara said, her voice flat. It was going to casinos. Yes, Jennifer whispered, finally looking at Barbara, her eyes filled with a profound, shared shame. A lot of it. The money you earned working extra shifts. The money from your savings. He was gambling it away. And I knew. For the last few months, I've known. And I did nothing. I am so sorry, Barbara. I was too ashamed, too proud, and too scared to tell you the truth. Barbara sat back in her chair, the solid wood pressing against her spine. She felt a strange, hollow calm. The truth, in all its devastating ugliness, was somehow less painful than the slow poison of being dismissed and devalued. The story was no longer about her not being good enough. It was a much darker, more tragic tale of addiction, fear, and human frailty. She looked at the weeping, broken woman across the table. Her daughter-in-law. The mother of her grandson. Another soul caught in the wreckage of Michael's collapse. Why are you telling me this now? She asked gently. What happened tonight? Because I can't do it anymore, Jennifer said, a new, ragged edge of finality in her voice. Tonight, he came home and confessed. Not everything. Just that we are on the verge of being evicted. That the car is about to be repossessed. That we are completely, irrevocably broke. He wanted me to call my father and ask for a massive bailout. When I refused, when I told him we needed to come clean, he became enraged. He told me it was my fault, that if I were a more supportive wife, he wouldn't be under so much pressure. Her voice trembled. And then he said that his mother would never have let him down like this. He was going to call you. He was sure that if he told you the full story, you would sell your apartment to save him. The monstrous entitlement of it, the assumption that she was his final, inexhaustible resource to be liquidated, sent a chill down Barbara's spine. It was the logic of an addict, a logic that saw other people not as human beings, but as obstacles or tools. When I told him you had cut him off for good, Jennifer finished, he told me to get out. He said if I wasn't going to be part of the solution, I was just part of the problem. So I left. Jennifer looked up, her face a plea. I'm at my breaking point, Barbara. I'm scared. Not just of the financial ruin, but of who Michael has become. The lying, the rage, it's like living with a stranger. In that raw, unguarded moment, Barbara saw past all the layers of class, pride, and resentment. She saw a frightened woman who had lost her way and had nowhere to turn. She reached across the table, her hand, with its faint scent of vanilla, covering Jennifer's cold, trembling one. You're not alone, Barbara said, her voice quiet but firm. And in the warmth of her small, fragrant kitchen, amidst the wreckage of their shared illusions, an impossible, fragile alliance was born. The morning after Christmas dawned cold and brilliantly clear, the sky a pale, washed-out blue. The world outside Barbara's window was pristine, blanketed in a fresh layer of snow that muffled all sound, creating a deceptive sense of peace. Inside the small apartment, however, the atmosphere was thick with a tense, quiet anticipation. It felt like the calm before a significant battle, a day when strategies would be drawn and futures decided. Jennifer had woken early, her face etched with a sleepless anxiety. She moved about the kitchen like a nervous phantom, unable to eat, her hands constantly twisting a paper napkin into a shredded ruin. The bravado she had felt the previous evening, buoyed by the unexpected support of Barbara's friends, had evaporated in the harsh light of morning, leaving behind a raw, visceral fear of confronting her parents. "What if he changes his mind?" she whispered to Barbara, staring into a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. "What if my father wakes up this morning and decides I'm a disgrace after all? What if they've come not to help, but to lecture me, to take me home and hide me away like a family shame?" "They are your parents, Jennifer," Barbara said, her voice a steady, calming presence. "Their first instinct will be to protect their child. Your father's anger will be directed at Michael, for deceiving him and hurting you. Your mother's concern will be for your well-being. Trust in that." Barbara poured herself a cup of tea, her own hand surprisingly steady. A month ago, the prospect of Oleg and Diana Belmont entering her home would have filled her with a profound, social terror. She would have worried about her simple furniture, her worn rugs, the chipped paint on the windowsill. Today, she felt none of that. This was her territory, her sanctuary. And within these walls, her simple, quiet strength felt more potent than all the Belmonts' wealth and influence. They were coming to her home not as superiors, but as supplicants, seeking a solution for their broken daughter. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. At precisely 10 o'clock, a long, black, impeccably clean luxury sedan, a car that looked more suited to a diplomatic motorcade than to their modest street, pulled up to the curb. Its engine purred with a quiet, expensive hum that seemed to command silence from the neighborhood. Barbara and Jennifer watched from the living room window as Oleg and Diana Belmont emerged. Oleg was dressed, as always, in a perfectly tailored dark suit and overcoat, his posture rigid and imposing even on the snowy sidewalk. Diana, a woman Barbara had only ever seen from a distance at social events, was equally elegant in a cream-colored wool coat and pearls, her face, usually a mask of polite social grace, now tight with worry. As they walked up the shoveled pathway to Barbara's door, a small, significant detail caught Barbara's eye. Oleg was carrying a large, expensive-looking briefcase. He was not coming for a family chat. He was coming for a board meeting. Barbara opened the door before they had a chance to ring the bell. "Oleg." "Diana," she said, her tone level and welcoming. "Please, come in out of the cold." Diana Belmont rushed past her husband and straight to her daughter, enveloping Jennifer in a fierce, protective hug. She held her for a long moment, stroking her hair, murmuring soft, soothing words. In that instant, she was not the formidable socialite Diana Belmont, she was just a mother, holding her hurting child. Oleg followed more slowly, his eyes doing a quick, sweeping survey of the room. It was the same assessing gaze he had used on his first visit, but this time it lacked its former arrogance. It was replaced by a grim, weary gravity. He looked like a general surveying an unexpected and costly battlefield. "Barbara," he said, nodding to her. The greeting held a new, grudging respect. "Thank you for providing a safe harbor for my daughter." "She is my daughter-in-law," Barbara replied simply. "This is her family home, too." The four of them gathered in the small living room. It was a surreal tableau. The Belmonts, in their cashmere and pearls, looked like figures from a glossy magazine, photoshopped into the humble, lived-in reality of Barbara's world. The contrast was stark, yet the tension that filled the room was not one of social awkwardness, but of shared crisis. Barbara served tea in her best, though mismatched, china cups. Diana never let go of Jennifer's hand. Oleg placed his briefcase on the floor beside his chair and sat stiffly upright, a man ready to get down to business. "All right, Jennifer," Oleg began, his voice low and controlled. "Your mother and I have had a long night. We are here to listen. I want you to tell us everything. From the beginning. And I want the unvarnished truth. No more evasions. No more protecting him. We cannot formulate a strategy until we have a complete and accurate damage assessment." His corporate language was jarring, yet it was also, in its own way, reassuring. He was treating this not as an emotional melodrama, but as a complex problem to be solved with logic and resources. Taking a deep breath, and remembering Richard's advice, Jennifer began to speak. She did not weep or dissolve into hysterics. She spoke with a clear, steady, and devastatingly calm voice. She laid out the timeline of Michael's deceit, starting with the failure of the startup, the initial lies, the escalating requests for money from Barbara, and finally, the dark turn into gambling. She spoke of the hidden credit cards, the secret loans, the casinos. She did not editorialize or blame. She presented the facts as she knew them, a grim and detailed accounting of her husband's descent and her own complicity in the lies. Barbara listened, a silent witness. She was hearing some of these details for the first time herself. Each new revelation, a pawned piece of Jennifer's jewelry, a high-interest loan from a shadowy online lender, was another shovel of dirt on the grave of the son she thought she had raised. Oleg listened without interruption, his face a stony mask, his steepled fingers pressed against his lips. Diana's face crumpled with each new horror, silent tears tracing paths through her perfect makeup. When Jennifer finished, a heavy silence descended upon the room. It was finally broken by Oleg. "The man I entrusted my daughter to is not a failed entrepreneur," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "He is a common thief and a compulsive liar with a gambling addiction. This is not a business failure. This is a character rot." He turned to his daughter, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. "You are right to leave him. This is not salvageable. Our immediate priority is to extricate you from this disaster as cleanly and quickly as possible." He reached down and snapped open his briefcase on the coffee table. Inside, it was not filled with papers, but was perfectly organized with files and a legal pad. The businessman was in his element. "First," he declared, "the legal front. I have already spoken to Victor Orloff, my corporate attorney. He is the best, and he is ruthless. He will handle the divorce. His primary objective will be to shield you from as much of this joint debt as possible. We will argue that the bulk of it was incurred fraudulently by Michael to finance a hidden addiction, without your knowledge or consent. It will be a fight, but Victor is a shark." He looked at Jennifer. "You will not have to speak to Michael again. All communication will go through Victor. Understood?" Jennifer nodded, looking overwhelmed but relieved. "Second," Oleg continued, "the financial front. You are to close all your joint bank accounts immediately. We will open a new account for you, in your name only. I will transfer an initial sum to cover your living expenses for the next 6 months. You are not to worry about money. Your only job is to focus on your recovery from this trauma." He paused, then looked directly at Barbara. "Victor will also be in contact with you, Barbara, if you are willing. We will need a detailed accounting of all the funds you transferred to Michael. We will build a case that he defrauded you as well. While recovering the money may be impossible, establishing a legal record of his fraud will be crucial in the divorce proceedings." Barbara simply nodded. "Third," Oleg said, his voice hardening again, "the practicalities. You are not going back to that house. It is a toxic environment, and the creditors will soon be circling. You will come home with us for now. We will find you a new apartment, something secure and comfortable, and we will furnish it. You will start over, fresh." Diana, who had been silent, finally spoke, her voice thick with emotion. "And Leo? My grandson?" "Leo will stay with you, of course," Oleg said firmly. "We will ensure you have full custody. Victor will see to it. Michael, in his current state, is not a fit parent. It was a comprehensive, overwhelming, and ruthlessly efficient plan of attack. Oleg Belmont was mobilizing his considerable resources to rescue his daughter, treating the problem with the same strategic intensity he would apply to a hostile takeover. Barbara watched him, a complex mix of emotions churning within her. She felt an immense relief for Jennifer. She was no longer alone, the full weight of her powerful family was now behind her. But Barbara also felt a quiet pang of sadness. This was how the rich solved problems, with lawyers and money, with swift, decisive action that swept away the mess. Her own approach had been one of quiet endurance and sacrifice, a slow, painful journey that had led, by a circuitous route, to the same conclusion. She wondered, for a fleeting moment, what might have happened if she had possessed such resources herself. When the meeting was concluded, and the Belmonts were preparing to leave with a visibly relieved Jennifer, Diana turned to Barbara. She took both of Barbara's hands in her own gloved ones. "Barbara," she said, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I don't know how to thank you. You took my daughter in when she had nowhere else to go. You showed her a kindness that, frankly, we have not always shown you. I am deeply sorry for that. And I am deeply grateful." Coming from this proud, elegant woman, the apology was deeply moving. "We are family," Barbara said again, the words feeling more true now than ever before. Oleg, standing by the door, gave a curt, final nod. "We will be in touch," he said. It was not a threat, but a statement of fact. They were allies now, bound by the shared, unfortunate reality of Michael's actions. After they left, the silence that descended on the apartment was different. It was not empty or tense. It was peaceful. The crisis had a plan. The chaos had a new order. Barbara made herself another cup of tea and sat in her armchair, feeling the emotional exhaustion of the day settle over her. An hour later, her phone rang. It was Richard. "I was just thinking of you," he said, his voice a comforting warmth. "I imagined today might be eventful. How are you holding up?" "The Belmonts were just here," she said, and proceeded to give him a summary of the Council of War. He listened patiently, as always. "It sounds like Oleg is a formidable man to have on your side," he commented when she finished. "He is," Barbara agreed. It was like watching a military campaign being planned. Efficient. Ruthless. It made me feel, a little bit small. "Why small?" Richard asked gently. "Because he can fix this for her with a checkbook and a phone call to the right lawyer," Barbara confessed, voicing the insecurity that had been nagging at her. "I just endured. I just gave what little I had until I had nothing left to give." "Barbara, don't ever think that what you did was small," Richard's voice was firm, almost stern. "Oleg is providing a solution, and that's good. But you provided a sanctuary. You gave her safety and compassion when she was at her absolute lowest point. You gave her the courage to face them in the first place. One is a transaction. The other is grace. They are not the same thing. What you did was the harder, and ultimately, the more profound act." His words were a healing balm. He had a way of seeing to the heart of things, of valuing the very qualities in her that she had always taken for granted. "I had a thought," he said, changing the subject. "This has been a very heavy few weeks for you. I think you deserve a break from all this drama. There is a small, quiet inn up in the mountains, about 2 hours' drive from here. Wonderful food, roaring fireplaces, beautiful walking trails. Would you consider getting away for a weekend? Just to breathe some clean air and not think about any of this for 48 hours. The invitation was a lifeline to a world beyond her immediate troubles. A world of fireplaces and walking trails and easy companionship. A world she was beginning to believe she deserved. "Richard," she said, a genuine, tired smile in her voice. "I think that is the best idea I have heard in a very long time." As she hung up the phone, Barbara looked around her quiet, simple living room. It had been the backdrop for so much pain, so much turmoil, so much transformation. It had been a command center, a crisis shelter, a war room. And now, finally, it was beginning to feel like home again. A home that was entirely her own, a base from which she could, perhaps, start to build a new life, one weekend getaway at a time. The first step, she realized, was not about conquering the world, but simply about finding a small patch of peace within it. The 2 weeks leading up to the weekend getaway with Richard were a period of profound and quiet recalibration for Barbara. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape that was irrevocably altered. The daily drama of Michael and Jennifer's crisis was replaced by a strange but not unwelcome quiet. Jennifer, now ensconced in the formidable fortress of her parents' care, would call Barbara every few days. Her voice, once fraught with panic, was now steady, albeit tired. She spoke of meetings with the shark-like lawyer, Victor Orloff, of signing papers she barely understood, of the slow, grinding, and impersonal machinery of divorce and debt settlement that had been set in motion. "It's like I'm watching a movie about someone else's life," Jennifer confessed during one call. "Lawyers, financial advisors, they talk about asset division and liability shields. It all feels so disconnected from the reality of what happened." "That's their job," Barbara replied soothingly. "Their job is to turn a human tragedy into a manageable legal problem. Your job is to heal." Their conversations were a new and surprising fixture in Barbara's life. A genuine bond had been forged in the crucible of their shared crisis. Jennifer would ask about Vanilla Cloud, about Barbara's new cake designs. Barbara would listen as Jennifer talked about her first tentative therapy sessions, about the difficult process of untangling her own identity from the wreckage of her marriage. They were two women finding their way in a new world, leaning on each other in unexpected ways. Michael did not call. The silence from his end was absolute, a black hole of anger, shame, and denial. Barbara tried not to dwell on it, but his absence was a constant, low-grade ache in her heart. She knew, with a weary certainty, that he had to hit his own, personal rock bottom before he would even consider reaching for help. All she could do was wait, and hope that when he did, it would not be too late. In the midst of this strange new quiet, Richard was a beacon of normalcy and gentle joy. He didn't press her for details about the ongoing legal drama. He seemed to possess an intuitive understanding that what she needed most was not to rehash the trauma, but to be distracted from it, to be reminded that life contained other things besides lawyers and broken marriages. He would drop by in the evenings, not for a formal date, but just to share a cup of tea, to bring her a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy, or to simply sit in companionable silence while she sketched out a new cake design. His presence was a profound comfort. It was the quiet, undemanding companionship of an equal. He was not a project to be fixed, a child to be supported, or a superior to be placated. He was simply a man who enjoyed her company, who valued her thoughts, and who saw her, clearly and completely, as Barbara. The day of their trip to the mountains arrived, bright and cold. Richard picked her up in his comfortable, solid sedan. He had a thermos of hot coffee and a small bag of croissants from her favorite bakery waiting for her on the passenger seat. The simple, thoughtful gesture brought a lump to her throat. It had been years, decades even, since anyone had taken care of her in such a small, tender way. As they drove out of the city, the landscape began to change. The gray, angular lines of buildings gave way to rolling hills, then to the majestic, snow-dusted peaks of the mountains. The air itself seemed to change, becoming cleaner, sharper, scented with pine and cold earth. With every kilometer they traveled, Barbara felt the tight knot of anxiety in her shoulders begin to loosen. She was leaving the battlefield behind. The inn was exactly as Richard had described it, a charming, rustic lodge nestled in a secluded valley. It was built of dark, heavy logs, with smoke curling merrily from a stone chimney. Inside, a fire roared in a massive hearth, casting a warm, flickering glow over comfortable leather armchairs and colorful woven rugs. It was the antithesis of the Belmont sterile, formal mansion, and the opposite of her own small, memory-laden apartment. It was a neutral space, a place with no history, a place where she could simply be. Their rooms were simple but cozy, each with a small balcony overlooking a frozen, snow-covered lake. After they settled in, Richard suggested a walk. They bundled up in warm coats and scarves and set out on a trail that wound through a silent forest of tall pines. The world was hushed, muffled by the thick blanket of snow. The only sounds were the crunch of their boots on the path and the soft whisper of the wind in the high branches. The air was so cold it felt sharp and clean in her lungs. They walked for a long time without speaking, simply absorbing the profound peace of the winter woods. It was a comfortable silence, not an awkward one. Barbara found her mind, for the first time in months, quieting down. The endless loop of worries, about Michael, about Jennifer, about her own future, began to fade, replaced by a simple, sensory awareness of the moment, the brilliant white of the snow, the deep green of the pines, the comforting warmth of Richard's hand as he took hers, his glove rough against her own. "It's beautiful here," she said finally, her voice a soft cloud in the cold air. "I thought you would like it," he replied. "It's a place for quiet reflection. For healing." He looked at her, his kind eyes serious. "You've been carrying a very heavy load, Barbara." "I suppose I have," she admitted. "For a very long time." "It's all right to set it down for a while," he said gently. That evening, they had dinner in the inn's small, candlelit dining room. The food was simple but exquisitely prepared, trout caught from a local stream, roasted root vegetables, and a rich, dark bread. They shared a bottle of red wine, and as the warmth of the food and the wine spread through her, Barbara found herself talking more openly than she ever had before. She didn't just recount the facts of her recent crisis. She spoke of the deeper, older story, the years of reflexive self-sacrifice, the slow erosion of her own identity as she poured all of herself into being Michael's mother. She spoke of the ingrained belief that a good mother's love was measured by the totality of her self-abnegation. "I think," she said, swirling the deep red wine in her glass, "I thought my only value was in what I could give to him. My time, my money, my energy. When he and Jennifer told me I wasn't welcome, it felt like they were telling me I had no value at all, because my function was complete." Richard listened with an attentiveness that was almost a physical embrace. He didn't interrupt or offer platitudes. He simply held her gaze, his expression one of deep, compassionate understanding. "What you describe," he said when she had finished, "is a common affliction, especially for women of our generation. We were taught that our worth was reflected in the success and happiness of our families. But that's a flawed equation. A person's value is inherent. It's not a commodity to be earned or bestowed by others." He reached across the table and took her hand. "Your value, Barbara, has nothing to do with your son's business or your daughter-in-law's social standing. It resides in your compassion, your resilience, your quiet strength. And," he added, a small smile playing on his lips, "your truly exceptional ability to bake a honey cake." She laughed, a real, unburdened laugh. "You're a good man, Richard Aslanov." "I'm a man who knows a remarkable woman when he sees one," he replied, his voice soft but certain. Later that night, as he walked her to the door of her room, a comfortable, slightly nervous tension settled between them. The evening had been intimate, a crossing of an emotional threshold. He stood for a moment, his hand resting on the doorframe. "Barbara," he said, his voice a low murmur. "I want you to know, my intentions are serious. I am not looking for a casual companionship. I am, at this late stage in my life, looking for a partner. Someone to share the quiet years with." The directness of his declaration was both startling and deeply moving. There were no games, no coyness. Just the honest, vulnerable statement of a mature man who knew what he wanted. She looked up at him, into his kind, steady eyes. "I think," she said, her own voice soft but clear, "I might be looking for the same thing." He leaned in then, slowly, giving her ample time to turn away. She did not. She met him halfway. The kiss was not the tentative, exploratory kiss of their first dates. It was a kiss of deep, mutual recognition. It was gentle yet firm, filled with a quiet passion and the promise of a shared future. It was a kiss that tasted of red wine, of cold winter air, and of profound, unexpected hope. When he finally pulled away, he rested his forehead against hers for a long moment. "Good night, Barbara," he whispered. "Good night, Richard." She entered her room, her heart beating a strong, steady rhythm, her body humming with a warmth that had nothing to do with the inn's heating system. She felt alive. Not just surviving, not just coping, but truly, vibrantly alive. She didn't sleep immediately. She stood on her small balcony for a long time, wrapped in a blanket, looking out at the moonlit, snow-covered landscape. The world was vast and silent. A month ago, such a vista would have mirrored the emptiness she felt inside. Tonight, it felt different. It felt like a blank page. A new horizon. She thought about her future. For so long, her vision of the future had been inextricably linked with Michael. She had imagined a peaceful old age, surrounded by her son, her daughter-in-law, her grandchildren. That vision was gone, shattered. But in its place, something new and unexpected was beginning to form. It was a future that included the cheerful chaos of her friendship with Galena. It included the surprising, evolving bond with Jennifer. It included the quiet joy of her growing business, of creating something beautiful with her own hands. And it included this kind, intelligent, wonderful man who made her feel seen and cherished. It was a future that was hers. Not defined by her relationship to anyone else, but by her own choices, her own passions, her own capacity for joy. It was a smaller, perhaps quieter future than the one she had imagined, but it was infinitely more real, more honest, and more deeply satisfying. A few snowflakes began to drift down from the dark sky, silent and perfect. Barbara held out her hand and watched one land on her glove, a tiny, intricate crystal. Like that snowflake, her life had been shattered into 1,000 pieces. But she was learning, slowly and patiently, to gather those pieces and assemble them into a new pattern, a new mosaic, one that was uniquely, beautifully, and unapologetically her own. And for the first time in a very long time, she looked toward the horizon not with trepidation, but with a quiet, hopeful curiosity. The first anniversary of what Barbara now privately called the Great Upheaval arrived not with a storm, but with the gentle, crystalline beauty of the first true snowfall of the year. 1 year ago, on a day just like this, her world had been a maelstrom of confrontation and crisis. Today, the world outside her window was a scene of serene, settled peace, a quiet reflection of the profound changes that had taken root in her own life and the lives of those around her. She stood in the bay window of a living room that was not her own. It was a new space, one she and Richard had chosen together. After a year of their relationship deepening from a tentative romance into a steady, loving partnership, they had made a significant decision. They had both sold their old homes, his, a large, quiet house filled with the ghosts of his previous life, hers, the small apartment that had been both her sanctuary and her prison, and bought a new place together. It was a modest but lovely 2-story house on a quiet, tree-lined street, with a large, sunny kitchen for Barbara and a book-lined study for Richard. It was a house with no memories, a blank canvas upon which they were painting their shared future. The process had been both terrifying and liberating, a deliberate shedding of the past to make way for the present. From the window, she watched Richard outside, his silver hair dusted with snowflakes, patiently teaching a bundled-up, giggling 2-year-old Leo how to make a snowball. The sight filled her with a quiet, bone-deep contentment that was a world away from the frantic, prideful hope she had once harbored. This was not the grand future she had envisioned, but it was real. It was gentle. It was true. Jennifer had arrived earlier that morning, dropping Leo off before heading to a meeting. The transformation in her former daughter-in-law was, in many ways, the most dramatic of all. The brittle, status-conscious shell had been completely stripped away, revealing a woman of surprising strength and quiet determination. After the divorce was finalized, a brutal, messy affair handled with ruthless efficiency by her father's lawyers, she had refused her parents' offer of a comfortable, subsidized life. Instead, she had taken a small, Spartan apartment downtown and found a job. Not in a glamorous art gallery, but as a junior associate at a bustling event planning company. The work was demanding, the pay was modest, but it was hers. For the first time in her adult life, she was financially independent, her self-worth tied not to a man's success or a family's name, but to her own competence. She was paying off the mountain of marital debt, one small, disciplined payment at a time. The expensive clothes had been replaced with practical, professional attire. The haunted, panicked look in her eyes had been replaced by a clear, focused resolve. Her relationship with Barbara had settled into a kind of familial friendship that neither of them could have predicted. They were bound by the shared trauma, and by their mutual love for Leo. Jennifer would often join Barbara and Richard for Sunday dinner, bringing not expensive wine, but a simple, homemade salad and stories of her work week. She and Barbara could talk for hours, a comfortable, easy rapport having replaced the years of stilted formality. Jennifer had, against all odds, become family in a way she never was when she was actually married to Michael. The thought of Michael still brought a familiar, quiet ache to Barbara's heart. His journey had been the most difficult, the most fraught with setbacks. After the confrontation on Christmas Day, he had spiraled further into his addiction. Oleg Belmont, true to his word, had made good on his threats. He had systematically dismantled Michael's life, foreclosing on the house, repossessing the car, and ensuring that every creditor knew exactly where to find him. He had hit a bottom so hard and so absolute that there was nowhere left to go but up. It was Jennifer, surprisingly, who had made the call that finally turned the tide. 6 months after their separation, she had found him in a desperate state and had driven him, not to a hospital, but to the door of a 90-day inpatient treatment facility for gambling addiction. It was an act not of reconciliation, but of profound, tough-minded compassion. His recovery was a slow, uneven process. He had relapsed once, but had managed to pull himself back. He now lived in a small, furnished room, worked a mundane data entry job, and attended Gamblers Anonymous meetings 5 nights a week. He was grappling with the mountain of debt he had created and the wreckage of the relationships he had destroyed. His relationship with Barbara was cautious, fragile. He called her once a week. The conversations were no longer about money or grand schemes. They were quiet, stilted, and filled with the vast, unspoken spaces of his shame and her pain. He was slowly, painstakingly learning to be honest. She was learning to offer support without enabling, to love the son he was trying to become without forgetting the damage the old son had done. She attended a support group for families of addicts, where she learned that her journey was not unique, that loving an addict was a complex dance of compassion and boundaries. One recent phone call had marked a turning point. "I used to blame you," he had confessed, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't quite place. "I told myself that if you had just given me more, I wouldn't have had to do what I did. But they teach us in the program, it was never about the money. It was about the emptiness. I was trying to fill a hole inside me with the thrill of the win." He paused. "I'm sorry, Mom. For everything. For the money, yes. But mostly for the lies. And for making you feel like you weren't good enough." The apology, raw and unadorned, had been the first true step toward healing the chasm between them. He was, for the first time, taking responsibility. Barbara's own life had blossomed in ways she could never have imagined. Vanilla Cloud, her small home business, had grown into a beloved local institution. With Richard's encouragement and a small business loan, her first time ever borrowing money, a fact she found wryly amusing, she had opened a proper storefront. Vanilla Cloud Café was a small, charming shop in the center of town, with a handful of tables, a gleaming espresso machine, and a glass counter filled with her beautiful, delicious creations. It was her kingdom. She loved the morning ritual of unlocking the door, the scent of fresh coffee mingling with baking scones. She loved her small team of employees, the pleasant rhythm of her customers, the quiet satisfaction of building something real and successful with her own two hands. It was a success that was entirely hers, measured not in projections and status symbols, but in the simple, daily reality of a balanced ledger and a happy customer. Her life with Richard was a quiet joy. It was a partnership of equals, built on mutual respect, shared interests, and a deep, abiding affection. They took walks, they traveled to nearby towns, they read books side by side in comfortable silence. He was her confidant, her champion, and her dearest friend. He had shown her that love didn't have to be a draining act of sacrifice, it could be a replenishing source of strength and happiness. He loved her not for what she could do for him, but for who she was. The concept was still, at times, a revelation. As she watched him now, lifting a laughing Leo high into the air, a profound sense of peace washed over her. She thought back to that Christmas 1 year ago, to the desperate hope she had clung to, the hope of a simple invitation, of a small acknowledgement from her son. She had thought that was the key to her happiness. She had been so wrong. Her happiness had not been waiting for her at her son's table. It had been waiting for her to build her own table, and to invite the people who truly deserved a seat. It was a table that included Richard, and Galena, and even, surprisingly, Jennifer. It was a table where love was not a transaction, but a freely given gift. Later that afternoon, the house was filled with warmth and the cheerful chatter of friends. They had decided to host a small, informal gathering to mark the first snow. Galena was there, regaling the room with a story. Jennifer was there, sipping tea and having a quiet, intense conversation with Richard about a new art exhibit. Leo was asleep on the sofa, exhausted from his adventures in the snow. The doorbell rang. Barbara opened it to find Michael standing on the porch. He was thinner, his face was lined with a new, sober gravity, but his eyes were clear for the first time in years. He held a small, clumsily wrapped gift in his hands. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice quiet. "I hope it's okay. I wanted to drop this off for Leo." "Of course, it's okay," she said, her heart doing a familiar, painful flip. "Come in, Michael." He hesitated, his eyes flicking to the sounds of laughter coming from the living room. "I don't want to intrude." "You're not intruding," she said gently. He stepped inside, looking around the new house with a kind of sad wonder. He saw Jennifer across the room, and their eyes met for a brief, complicated moment. There was no anger, just a shared, sorrowful history. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod, an acknowledgement of his presence, before turning back to her conversation. He handed the gift to Barbara. "It's not much," he said. "It's a wooden train. I remembered how much I loved mine when I was his age." He had remembered something. It was a small detail, but it was a start. "He'll love it, Michael," she said. They stood in the hallway for a moment, the comfortable sounds of the party washing around them. "The cafe looks great, Mom," he said finally. I walked by it the other day. You've done something amazing." It was the first time he had acknowledged her success, her new life. It was a small offering, a fragile bridge across the vast canyon of their past. "Thank you, Michael," she said. "I'm happy." He nodded, a flicker of understanding in his tired eyes. "I'm glad," he said. And she believed, for the first time, that he truly was. He didn't stay long. He said his goodbyes quietly and left, a solitary figure walking out into the snowy evening. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no tearful reunion. It was just a quiet, tentative step on a long, long road. But it was a step forward. Barbara closed the door and leaned against it, holding the small, lumpy gift in her hands. She thought of the silver spoon she had polished so hopefully 1 year ago. That spoon had represented a legacy she had tried to force, an inheritance of her values. This simple wooden train, bought with what little money her son now earned honestly, was something different. It was a token of a new beginning, a legacy not of wealth or status, but of hard-won sobriety and a dawning self-awareness. She returned to the living room, to the warmth and light and easy laughter. Richard caught her eye from across the room and gave her a questioning, supportive look. She smiled back, a small, serene smile that told him everything was okay. She had cancelled their mortgage payments, and in doing so, had set off an avalanche that had destroyed the false structures of all their lives. But now, a year later, in the cleared and quiet landscape, new things were beginning to grow. Things that were smaller, perhaps, but infinitely more real. Things like honesty, and responsibility, and a hard-won, quiet peace. And she understood, with a clarity that was as pure and bright as the snow falling outside her window, that this was the greatest inheritance of all.